Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to bring this special meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order, please. This is the first meeting in which the Budget and Finance Committee will begin considering the Mayor's proposed budget for fiscal year 2012-2013. Today is Friday, April 27th, 2012. I'm joined by I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee. I'm joined by my colleagues Mitch Englander and Bill Rosendahl. Gentlemen, it's good to have you here. Oh, and Mr. Kretz is here as well. Mr. Kretz, thank you. I thought we would start just by reminding ourselves of the nature of the challenge that the city is facing right now. Since the world's economy melted down in 2008, this city, like cities throughout America and countries throughout the world, have suffered severe setbacks in their revenues. And the result of that has been that this city has made significant reductions in recent years in what it has been able to spend. The city had made commitments in better times, which has created a gap in our ability to meet those commitments as revenues have declined. And we now face a budget challenge that is certainly as severe as any that we've ever faced in any of our lifetimes, certainly since the Great Depression. But there's also been some very important good work done by the city family in recent years to reduce the cost of government, downsize government. The mayor, the council, our staff, the CAO's office, CLA's office, and certainly our labor union partners have all contributed to addressing this significant challenge in a very significant way. And as a result, we now have, for example, the smallest general fund workforce in this city that we've had since Tom Bradley was mayor. That's a real change. That's a real significant amount of progress that we've made. But of course, our task is not completed, and we still have much more work to do. This is going to be a continuing process, as I see it. It's going to evolve over a number of years, where the city really has to reinvent itself and decide what we want our city to look like, how we want our city government to function, what are the real core services that our city needs to deliver to its constituents, and how can we best provide those in the most cost-efficient way. So this is going to be a process where we evaluate every idea, consider every suggestion, attempt to find every reasonable way that we can bring our budget into greater balance and make it more sustainable. And I want to thank, for example, the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates for their participation, CORE and the suggestions that it's made, the Controller's Office produced a number of suggestions, and of course the continuing work of the Mayor and the Council, the CAO's Office and the CLA's Office. We are going to be continuing through this effort for the foreseeable future. This is not going to be something that we are going to resolve this year. We are going to have to continue to be vigilant about bringing fiscal sustainability to this city over the course of a number of years. So today is the first day that we begin that process with this year's budget. The way it will work is we will shortly be hearing a presentation on the Mayor's proposed budget. Following that presentation from the Mayor's office and the CAO, we will hear public comment, and if you haven't already filled out a card and you would like to provide comment on the budget, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward. It's going to be, and then over the course of the next several days, today included, we're going to be hearing individual reports from each department about that department's budget, the potential challenges that it faces, service reductions that there may have been, and so forth. So we'll have individual presentations about each department, as has been done in the past. That will continue through next Friday. It is my goal, and I'm going to try to be disciplined about this as best I can, it will be my goal to finish each of these meetings by 7 o'clock in the evening. I don't think anyone is well served by marathon sessions that go until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. But in order for us to maintain that discipline and try to achieve that very aggressive schedule, it really is going to require a great deal of focus by each of us on the committee, by those who are making presentations, and by the public to try to keep our eye on the ball, what we're dealing with today in the budget, and not stray into a lot of discussion that involves things other than the budget considerations that are before us right now. So with that, I think, again, if you would like to provide public comment, please fill out one of these cards. We will take public comment today at the conclusion of Mr. Santana's presentation, and then it will be my practice on each of these hearing days. We'll try to take public comment towards the beginning of the hearing, and then do it in a block at the beginning of the meeting, and then we'll continue with each department. So with that, I'd like to invite the Mayor's office to present the budget. Mr. Guglielmo, welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Krikorian, Vice Chair Englander, and the members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Neil Guglielmo. I currently serve as the Deputy Mayor for Budget and Financial Policy for the Mayor's Office. I'm here to provide you with a brief overview of the proposed budget for the coming fiscal year 2012-13. And I'd like to thank you, obviously, for your time, your consideration, and for the many hours that we have looking forward to ahead. The budget you're about to review is the product of really countless hours of research, analysis, and collaboration. I'd like to thank the CAO's office next to me, the CAO and his staff. They really have worked tirelessly to put this budget together with us. I also want to thank the state departments, as you have, sir, and their staff. A great deal of leadership and resolve, really putting together a very challenging budget. Also the neighborhood council representatives, community members, all those who took the mayor's budget survey and participated overall in the development of this budget. And finally, I want to thank my team, the staff that have helped me put this budget together, and as well as our General Service Department print shop, who provide us with all the nifty books that we have before us. So I'll start off with two basic principles that the mayor gave me in working to develop this proposed budget. The first was to protect and maintain our core services, especially public safety. And the second was to put together a budget that was structural, that would look towards ongoing solutions, revenue solutions, and reductions, so that we could ensure our long-term fiscal stability for the city. And of course we do this as we balance the needs of our communities with the realities of just limited financial resources the city has. I will say these challenges, though, provide us with an opportunity as well to reassess our priorities, to look at efficiencies and how we can maybe do things differently. The mayor believes, and I believe we all believe, that the city's #1 priority truly is public safety. And police protection, emergency incident responses are absolutely essential for all of us in the city. This budget will continue to maintain the city's overall commitment to the size and readiness of our police force, and will ensure that the gains that we've made so far to reduce crime will be maintained and will not be reversed. The budget also will provide funding to maintain our gang reduction and youth development programs, which is part of our overall comprehensive strategy for public safety. The budget also restores critical services and resources in the fire department and lays the groundwork for a multi-year plan to improve emergency incident response citywide. This budget provides seed funding for a new economic development model for the city of Los Angeles following the dissolution of our CRA, and maintains and expands core services such as public library hours, street and pothole repairs. And I know that you're going to go over in much greater detail the services and programs of our departments as the departments come forward as well. Our intent throughout this process has been to analyze programs and functions and determine their overall costs and their effectiveness within the context of the reductions and the changes and the efficiencies that have already been done over the last 4 to 5 years. In order to preserve our vital services, ongoing reductions, the general fund's structural deficit are absolutely necessary. Included in these reductions, however, is the elimination of 669 authorized positions, 231 of those of which are filled. These position eliminations were determined in concert with the CAO and departments and were identified in consideration and in attempts to minimize the impacts to services to our communities. Many elements of this budget are consistent with the CAO's 3-year plan to fiscal sustainability. It implements responsible financial management policies and maximizes revenue opportunities. It realizes operational efficiencies, and it proposes measures to achieve a more stable workforce. The budget also establishes a $211 million reserve fund. This is the largest reserve fund ever, and there has never been a time in the city's history when having a strong reserve fund is even more critical than it is now. We strongly urge you to protect this reserve fund and secure the city's financial future. This budget also implements the first phase of a citywide performance management and strategic planning process and incorporates this into the ongoing city development budget process. Performance-based budgeting, it provides us with another tool for how we can look at allocating our scarce resources to critical programs and services, and it's really a first step. Departments will have to provide this information to the CAO's office, to the policymakers for consideration, and we'll have to adjust and look at that in the future. But it is a good first step. In terms of efficiencies, this budget also recognizes several efficiencies as well as the consolidation of some services. We have, working with our information technology agency, reduced telephone lines, and by reducing the number of landlines we have in the city, we've reduced costs. Working with our General Services Department and other departments, reduced the amount of office space that we lease from other buildings. That has also helped us to reduce costs. Also proposed is a human resources consolidation into our city personnel department, which will lead to efficiencies in how the city departments, who have already had several years of reductions, deal with the human resources needs. And we also have proposed the consolidation of the Office of Public Safety from General Service Department into the LAPD, and this was heard this morning in the Public Safety Committee, for example. The last point I'll make is that the pension reform, as proposed by the mayor, an 8-point plan for a new civilian pension tier. The CO has received some direction from the EERC to provide an analysis of civilian pension reform options, and we'll provide recommendations to the mayor and the council for consideration. The pension reform proposals that will probably come forward really recognize the significant contributions made to our workforce, our city employees, and the need for us to ensure the city's overall long-term financial sustainability, and as well ensuring that we will maintain quality retirement benefits for our workers so they are there for them when they retire. So with that, I would just conclude by, again, really showing my appreciation and to thank you. I know that it's a very difficult process. We welcome the questions. I really want to participate with you in the process, as well as the CEO and the departments. And again, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. There's questions for the mayor's office before we begin with the presentation. If not,
I have some.
oh, Mr. Rosendahl?
Yes, thank you for your presentation, and I appreciate the hard work. As Mr. Krikorian has said, the difficult situations we're in. I've had the humble privilege to be on this committee since I've been on council, which is 6 or 7 years. And in the very beginning, it was a different day than where it turned into, as Mr. Krikorian mentioned in his opening comments. And my latest awareness, people have said that the next 3 to 4 years, we might stay somewhat flat. I'm not hearing great stories. I'm not hearing bad stories, but the continued situation will continue. And it is all about revenue streams coming in, because we must do basic services. One of the things our constituents sometimes don't understand, we only get 20 cents on every dollar of property tax. They think all their property tax goes to the city. It doesn't. And then the second part of that is the forces of where our money comes from are unable to deliver it at the level they did. So it is seriously, as he said in his opening, the most serious moment we can be in. And having gone through years of other fixes, there are strategies going forward. I'm just curious how the mayor proposed the two revenue streams, the parking occupancy tax and also the documentary transfer tax, as two suggestions. And if they were to move forward by us, how much money are we talking about, and what ballot would it go on? And was there any kind of awareness in picking those two over other issues? I'm just curious how the mayor came up with those as revenue streams.
You know, sir, that's an excellent question. In looking at, as we prepared the proposed budget, the timing of revenues that could potentially come in through, say, a ballot measure, we did not recognize, obviously, any revenues in the proposed budget for any ballot measure at this time. We believe that we wanted to advance that discussion to your body and to the full council in the context of securing really funding for the go forward for public safety programs, you know, police, fire services, and others. And we have looked at a number of different areas in which we could look to increase tax revenues, and those are two of a number. The amounts would vary depending upon how much the increase would be contemplated. But I mean, I can turn it over to the CAO's office as well. We have been working with the CAO's office to look at potential ballot measures. Documentary transfer tax, parking occupancy tax were two of the ones that had been discussed. And I believe we have some language in Exhibit H that would, if approved, instruct the CAO to come back with some additional recommendations to the mayor and the council. But do you want to?
Again, as Neil indicated, the budget does direct us to come up with options, and ultimately that's something that your body would have to consider. Right. It should the public vote on a particular expansion of an existing tax or a new one, it will have no impact really in the fiscal year that we're facing. But the reason it's important to talk about it today is that we know now that we're facing about a $200 million deficit on July 1st of 2013. And we've exhausted most of our solutions over the last several years to get to that point. And so a new revenue source will be necessary in order to maintain the same infrastructure of services, particularly in public safety, in order for that particular year.
Okay. And my second question, which we'll go through the entire process, frankly, is the suggested layoff of civilians in various departments. Mm-hmm. The one, for me, that is the most challenging is the police department, because in that context, I certainly don't want a sworn officer doing a critical civilian job. It's been an issue we've been talking about for years, and I just want to understand every position and its critical nature. But I also believe that for all the other departments, we're in that kind of a stress situation, like Rec and Park, and some of the preventive strategies to crime come out of Rec and Park, come out of all kinds of other preventive strategies. And so when we get to the point of potential layoffs or getting rid of certain authorized positions, those are the kinds of questions and answers that will be key as I go forward with it as well. That's
certainly, sir. We understand that.
Thank you.
All right. Well, what I would suggest is why don't we go ahead and proceed with Mr. Santana's presentation, and then again, folks, public comment will come following Mr. Santana's presentation, and that will be public comment also for the departments that we're going to be considering today. So if you would please complete your card and bring it in, and then I'm sure my colleagues are going to have more questions that we can address to Mr. Santana and the Mayor's office after the completion of the presentation. So, Mr. Santana, welcome.
Thank you. Let me also start off by thanking the Mayor's office for their tireless work, both Neil and the entire team that worked on this, and frankly also the Mayor who spent many a weekend literally poring over every single budget and ultimately making personally the calls that you see reflected in this particular budget. I also want to thank my staff who haven't had really much of a break. Our budget is an ongoing process starting July 1st, and we monitor, make sure it gets done. And in a context of having about 20% less staff than when I first started here 3 years ago. So with that, in true CAO style, we have a PowerPoint presentation that that hopefully you have in front of you, and it's available on the screen for the public. Let me start off with a brief summary of sort of the main ideas and principles behind it. And as Neil indicated, the directive that the mayor gave us was to make sure that we leave the city in a much better place, not just next year while he's mayor, but the years after that when he's not. And so that guiding direction was really the foundation of the budget that you have before you. It starts with a realistic but reasonable reflection of our revenue. To the extent that we overestimate or underestimate revenue projections, we have to confront those variations in the middle of the year. And so we go through a tireless process. We consult with a number of economists. The chair of this committee joined us for that, who give us a projection of what the economy is looking like for the next year. We go through every major revenue source to ensure that we could come down to a reasonable number. And then for those areas where in particular there are a significant amount of moving parts, like the former CRA money, we use the most information we have and ultimately make a decision based on that. Towards the tail end of this process, you should know, and you've all read about, we received last-minute notice from our county assessor that the projections that he had given us were overestimated, and so we had to, in a matter of days, literally, find $16 million of additional savings and reductions as a result of that news. And we also consulted with neighboring counties to ensure that the final projection that he gave us was consistent in the same trajectory that we see in Southern California. The second issue is, as Neil indicated, that this budget presents solutions, reductions, and revenues, of which 65% are ongoing. The reason why that's important, the more ongoing revenue reductions and solutions that you adopt, you could count on those savings a year after year after year. If you've solved this entire budget, the $230+ million deficit that we're facing with one-time solutions, you would have to confront not only the $200 million problem that we know of, but that additional amount the following year. And it's been through that process that we've been able to significantly reduce the structural deficit over the last few years. And we're continuing to do so. In 2010, in our mid-year report, we had projected that the deficit for fiscal year 13-14 was going to be over $1 billion, a size that's hard to imagine today. So while we're clearly not there, and because of the number of solutions that have been very difficult and the partnership with labor, we've been able to significantly reduce that down to $200 million. It's important to lay out that context. The challenging part is, of course, that we're running out of solutions. The list of options becomes more and more limited every single year. This budget continues to recommend that the city maintain a fiscal emergency resolution because, in fact, there is a fiscal emergency. With a $230+ million deficit, there is, unfortunately, the continued need for furloughs. The fortunate part of what we've done over the last few years is that we've limited those furloughs to only one department, and that is the department recommended for furloughs is the city attorney's office. All other all other departments throughout the city will not have imposed furloughs on them, and that in turn means that there would be more people, more hours, higher productivity in departments, particularly departments like the Department of Finance. The other area, of course, is that as part of the mandate that the mayor issued, is that there is no deficit borrowing in this budget. So, in other words, solutions that are being recommended are not going to be paid by later generations. And so that is something that has been a principal hallmark of how we've approached the budget and something that we will continue to argue. And as Neil indicated, many of the solutions that are offered are consistent with the report that we issued a few weeks ago in the 3-year plan. So the next chart gives you a very high-level overview of the budget. As been indicated, our actual overall budget is increasing by 5.1%. In the general fund, it's an increase of 3.5%, and in the special funds by 8%. And in our positions, though, there is a recommendation to reduce the number of positions by 1.5%. And the question that's often asked, if you're increasing your budget and your revenue, why is it that you're reducing the number of positions? And as I've stated before your committee, and the answer is that in the general fund, our revenue is growing at a lesser pace than our expenditures. And as long as we have that gap, we will continue to face a structural deficit. The overall budget, under everything that has the city seal, is $20 billion, $867 million. And then you have before you sort of how that breaks out through the various departments. I won't go through that now. In chart number 4 this is both good news and bad news all on one page. The good news is if you track the red line again shows that what we had projected in January, that our deficit, January of 2010, what our deficit would have been, assuming that all the solutions that were adopted in the following years were one time. And we had projected a deficit of well over $1 billion for fiscal year 13-14. The budget that's before you reduces that down in a significant way, combined with all the other solutions that you've adopted throughout the last 3 years, to $200 million, $199 million. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we still have a $200 million deficit, and that deficit exists throughout the next few years. And again, it's based on the assumption that our revenue is growing at a very slow pace based on the anemic recovery in the economy, and that our expenditures are growing at a faster pace. So for fiscal year 14-15, we're projecting a deficit of $315 million. For fiscal year 15-16, $285, and 16-17, $253. So again, to emphasize, to the extent to which you adopt solutions that are ongoing, those solutions help reduce that structural deficit for future years. And so we will continue to urge you that as you review the mayor's budget and you make changes to it and add new programs, that you add those programs with identified ongoing reductions or new revenues that are not accounted for, and that you do not pursue options that seek one-time solutions for an ongoing cost, because that would result in simply delaying that reduction 6 months, a year later. On page number 5, we put all of our revenues, our main 7 revenue streams, in a larger context over the last couple decades. And clearly what you see is that the trend line was growing at a fairly good pace up until 2009. And then, of course, we experienced a recession, as the chair of the committee indicated, and we saw an unprecedented drop in all of our revenue streams. The economy has resulted in an anemic growth of those revenues. And for fiscal year, the next fiscal year that's coming, we're barely catching up to what we have lost over the last 4 years. It was hard to imagine that 5 years ago or 6 years ago, but that's been the unfortunate reality. Now, there's some revenues that are doing really well. We've had an unprecedented number of visitors into Los Angeles, and so we're seeing a very strong growth in our hotel occupancy tax. At the same time, we saw, as I stated earlier, a drop in our property tax. Our utility users tax, business tax, all of those are growing at a slower pace, and so combined is what is reflected in this trend line that's before you. Page number 6 will be sort of an overview of our 5 guiding principles, and the rest of the presentation will be centered around them. The first is, of course, responsible fiscal management, a focus on our core services, looking at alternative service delivery models to ensure that we provide the same level of service at a lower cost, while protecting our existing workforce, a sustainable workforce by a number of initiatives, some of them indicated in the mayor's budget, and then a new principle that we added this year is to strengthen our existing revenue streams, strengthen our collections, and identify new revenue for our system. So as these principles relate to the mayor's budget, the first principle is, as Neil indicated, the importance of maintaining a strong reserve fund. It is your policy that our reserve fund will be 5% of general fund receipts. And this budget gets as close to that as we've seen over the last decade, of 4.64% of the general fund. It's just $16 million shy of that 5%. You've heard me say this before, the reserve fund is a critical part of our budget. It's not a luxury item. It's not something we do because it's a nice thing to have. It's an essential part of us being able to get the strongest interest rates when we go out to market. It is what investors and bond rating agencies look at to assess the strength of our finances, and it's particularly important in moments of crisis because it signals that despite the fact that we have a structural deficit, that we have the ability to address the unforeseen. Now, we also know that beyond the normal things that could happen, like a major earthquake or another drop in the economy that are beyond our control, we have other looming clouds out there, like litigation, that would result in a major hit to the city. And so beyond this reserve fund, we continue to argue that we build the budget stabilization fund to address those unforeseen. On page number 8, it summarizes, shows the historic growth, the up and down that the reserve fund has experienced. In checking with other major cities, there are some cities which have lower bond rating that we do that would have close to a 0 reserve fund, and there are other cities that have similar or higher bond ratings that have as high as 8%, which San Diego has. On page number 9, we talk about another part of our recommendation is to make smarter, more effective investments for the future. What that means is that we continue, even in moments of fiscal crisis, find ways to strengthen our infrastructure. This budget provides $7.5 million for capital improvements. It's below the amount that you have established as a policy of the 1%, which is about $38 million. Each year that policy has been in place, we have not met that policy. And so part of what we're recommending, and the mayor has adopted in his budget, is that instead of pretending to make that investment, that we actually recognize that it's something that is beyond the means of the city given our structural deficit. And we recognize that our investments are made through other special funds, through our streets, through our sewer system, and identify a different way of managing our current assets and buildings. So we are recommending a suspension of that policy. What that does in turn is that it reduces the deficit on what's projected out, because we're not assuming that we have to fund that. That's the first thing we do each year. We have that 1% policy. We know we can't do it, so we take it out. So that artificially creates a higher deficit. Let's just be honest about what we do and find a more effective way. The other major investments is, of course, we're continuing to implement programs in fire vehicle management system, in our tax system, and in our financial management system. And this budget also directs and provides funding for strategic planning around IT functions so that we have an IT strategic plan for the future, so we could strengthen our fire learning system and strengthen our payroll system. Regardless of what size our government is, regardless of what crisis we're facing, these are things we will always have to do. We will always have a payroll system. We will always have a taxing system, and we always will have an IT system. And so we need to continue to invest in those areas. Slide number 10 talks about prioritizing and focusing on core services, and this budget does much of that to ensure that the public continues to rely on the critical areas. The first is, of course, it maintains 800 miles of pavement preservation by utilizing Prop C, Measure R gas tax, and Prop 1B funding. It continues to provide funding for petroleum and also identifies money in the UB should those costs incur. It provides funding to be hiring a new class, particularly in our fire department, which we haven't done in the last few years. It provides MICLA funding for fire equipment, fleet repair, fleet maintenance program. And then it also addresses in the UB funding for bank fees. That's something that we've had to confront in the last FSRs, and it's $8 million so that we can address it without having to make reductions in the middle of the year. In other core services, it continues to maintain 9,963 sworn positions. It adds to the fire department $32 million for constant staffing overtime, an issue that we had to confront in the middle of the year. This year, it assumes that continual funding and adds additional dollars. It provides funding for 6 variable staff ambulances, $750,000 for a third-party review of our deployment program to ensure that either we validate the program we have today or come up with better ways to manage it in the future. It funds an engine company in the San Fernando Valley based on the recommendation of the fire chief. It continues the deployment plan that was adopted a year ago, and it restores 9 EMS captains. All of the additional funding for the fire department were at the request of the chief. And this budget addresses all of the requests that the chief made during his hearings and after. In addition to that, in relation to core services, we have argued that we need to bring together areas that every department shares, and this budget does that in 2 areas. One, it funds the HR function and the consolidation of that throughout the city. That policy decision has already been adopted by your council. And it assumes the consolidation of the OPS into the LA Police Department. And we will respond to the specific questions raised at this morning's committee when that item is discussed in the context of both LAPD and GSD. On page 13, this budget directs my office to come back with responses and to explore alternative service delivery models for the convention center, the zoo, and cultural affairs, which would occur in the context of this budget, and also to examine other areas, including recreation and parks. And then as it relates to managed competition, it provides contractual services in hiring hall so that we're not adding to the workforce to only lay them off later, and find more effective ways to continue services while not adding to our pension and healthcare costs. The other area, as Neil has indicated, that the mayor presented in his budget was, of course, his proposal as it relates to pension reform. It is important to start off by saying that the proposal is limited to new hires. There isn't one element of what the mayor has proposed, should it be adopted by your council, that would impact current city employees. It is also important to point out that the adoption of the budget, it does not mean that you're adopting this proposal. That this proposal will have its own day in court. It's a separate policy matter that your council would consider. We're in the process of doing our actuarial studies, and we will first submit the results of that to ERC and then to the council as a whole. And there are no savings that are identified in this budget as assuming that this particular plan gets adopted. Having said that, I would argue that it is important to have a new pension tier. Our ability to start hiring back city employees in the same manner that we've had in the past is dependent on having those hires be affordable. And part of that includes a new pension tier. What we've seen in the police department with a new pension tier and with a 20% reduction in the cost of hiring new police officers has made the police hiring plan more affordable. This budget also includes a directive that we identify savings working through the JLMBC process on our healthcare program. We know now that Kaiser is proposed a 12% increase in costs for next calendar year. That increase is going to be challenging, and so we will be working on trying to reduce that cost and present that before your council. Other areas in which this budget ensures that we have a sustainable workforce is that it does eliminate 669 authorized positions. That means that there are fewer positions that we have to fund next year and the following year. And it's done in a way by looking through each department and building in efficiencies while maintaining the infrastructure of current programs that we have. The fifth area is, of course, as it relates to revenue. And a second area in which we look at an action that we take every single year is as it relates to SPRF. Each year, the mayor's budget proposes taking a portion of the SPRF dollars and then after declaring it as a surplus, and each year it gets adopted. But because it's an action that has to take place year after year after year, we can't account for those dollars as ongoing. We advise the mayor, and he's accepted, that from here on forward, that 18 million of the SPRF dollars be considered ongoing. And what that does is then allows for new revenue to be calculated in the projected deficit, reducing the structural deficit. What we've also done is utilized an increase in cultural affairs dollars and allow that increase to cover things that we have funded in the past to the general fund, specifically areas in culture and heritage events, that now provides those programs which are important to sort of the fabric of the city to have a permanent funding source without fear of being cut as they have been for the last 3 years. Now, when it comes to understanding the positions that are being eliminated, it is important to start off by saying that it was not the objective of this office or the objective of the mayor to try to find as many layoffs as possible. In fact, it was the opposite. It was our mandate to present a budget that had resulted in the least amount of layoffs as possible. And we did that by first identifying budgeted vacant positions. There are 669 budgeted vacant positions that are being proposed for elimination. Some of those are vacant because of attrition that has occurred naturally, but many of those are as a result of managed hiring. I know managed hiring is a dirty word around here, and you'll hear that from general managers as they come testify on their budget. But the truth is, by maintaining managed hiring, we have significantly reduced the growth of the city workforce. And why that's important is because by preventing that growth, it increases the number of vacant positions, and as a result, when we are going through the budget process, we avoid layoffs. And so it is a system that has worked for the last 3 years. Can it be approved? Of course it can. And the Managed Hiring Committee works efficiently to try to respond as much as possible. But until we have a new pension tier, until we no longer have a structural deficit, managed hiring will be something that this office will recommend because it is our objective to avoid layoffs year after year after year. But unfortunately, there are some layoffs related to this budget. Now, there are 231 positions of the 669 that are currently filled. That number will go down over the next several weeks and months. And so ultimately, the actual number of people that will no longer work for the city will very likely not be 231. That number is likely to go down significantly after the personnel department goes through its process. And some of these positions will be able to move into whatever few vacant positions we have. And of course, there will continue to be a commitment to place these positions in special funds and the proprietaries as much as possible. But in full disclosure, the flexibility in those areas is limited, is not to the same extent it's been in the past. And to put these positions in context in terms of every single budget, we've sort of compared the number of positions to the number of authorized positions. So for example, animal services, there are 11 currently filled positions, and compared to the 314 that they currently have authorized, it represents 3.5% of that department's workforce. The other area, of course, all areas of a concern, but the one that's been spoken to a lot has been in the police department. There are currently 3,169 authorized positions. 159 are being proposed for elimination, representing 5%. Now, in some departments, like neighborhood empowerment, there's only 2 positions that are being recommended for elimination, but that, because it's a small department, represents 9% of that department. And so this helps you understand the context and clearly shows that there wasn't an approach to basically cut everybody in the same way by 10%. It was a strategic process working closely with each department. I'll use Rec and Parks as an example. My office initially prepared the first list of position eliminations. It would have resulted in some layoffs. In working with the department, we were able to identify enough positions that were budgeted so there would be no layoffs in that department. And we did that aggressively with every single department, so at the end of the day, there would be as few layoffs as possible. Drilling down on the police department and fire department in particular, hearing the concerns that have been stated already and by the community, it's important to lay out the civilian workforce in context. If you look at what that workforce looked like in both police and fire, in fiscal year 1990 and 1991, and compare it to what it is today, there is 30% more civilians working in LAPD today than there were back in 1990. It's a workforce that has seen an increase in civilianization, not a decrease over time. But throughout the rest of the city, we've actually seen a significant decrease of the number of civilian positions, a decrease of 44%. And so since 1990 from today, there's been a shift of the civilian workforce away from non-sworn departments and into the sworn departments. And so as you look at the reductions being proposed, and you hear from the chief and his staff, we present this to help you look at the broader context of those reductions being proposed. The next slide shows you how much our workforce has been reduced as a whole over the last few years. And as Mr. Krikorian stated, we have the smallest civilian workforce in the general fund since Tom Bradley was mayor. And with these additional cuts, should they be adopted, it would reduce the workforce by 14.5% since its height back in 2007-8. The final area is on revenue. There was obviously new revenue that we could have not anticipated a year ago with the dissolution of the CRA. One of the results of that dissolution is that now the tax increment that would have normally gone to the CRA became available not just to the city, but to the state, the county, and the school districts. And so in the case of this proposed budget, it accounts for $48.6 million. Now, it was a challenge figuring out exactly what would be a responsible number to have, because very frankly, this is a moving target. There's so many pieces to this issue that we have very little control over. And we had that discussion when you chose not to be the successor agency, a decision that continues to be affirmed, I think, every day, given the difficulty of how this issue is proceeding. But ultimately, we will know what the real dollar figure is that we will receive once the Oversight Committee and the Department of Finance make their final decisions. The Oversight Committee has yet to meet. Their first meeting won't be for the next few weeks. And then they have a number of major issues to consider. We have spoken to the county auditor controller to get an estimate of when we should have a sense of what revenue we would receive. And very frankly, she told us to wait until January. So this is going to be one of those areas where we're going to be on pins and needles for the first half of the fiscal year, because while we believe we ultimately adopted a fairly conservative number, that number could go up, it could go down based on those actions. In terms of potential new revenue, of course, is the development of a new economic development model that the CLA and I have proposed a nonprofit to help develop an economic development strategy throughout the city, and that's being considered on a separate policy track. But this budget does provide $2.5 million of seed money to help fund that. This budget also anticipates additional revenue of emergency medical services reimbursement of $28.5 million. 15 million of it we believe is ongoing, and 13% is one time, and it does reflect changes in AB 678. And of course, as Mr. Rosendahl indicated, this budget also directs my office to work with the CLA in developing ballot initiatives that hopefully will help reduce the structural deficit for fiscal year 13-14. On page 22, we specifically outlined how we got to the $48 million being proposed as former CRA money. To put it in simply, there was $278 million of one-time potential revenue. When you subtract administrative fees and pass-throughs, you have $260 million. When you subtract the enforceable obligations, that also includes a reserve that's being proposed by the former CRA. There's $94 million available. Of that $94 million, we don't get all of it, unfortunately. We share that with the county and with the state and with the school districts, and our share of that would be 30%. This is assuming that everything that the DLA has proposed is adopted by the Oversight Committee, and as I stated, we don't know ultimately what they're going to do. We have one vote on that. We have 2 appointments, but ultimately control 1 vote. And so this is going to be an area we're going to be concerned about. As it relates to the ongoing, there was 253 available. Again, 24 million of fees passed through subtracting. When you eliminate the enforceable obligations, there's 60 million, and our share of that would be 18.6. Now, in conclusion, we do have recommendations for you as you proceed forward on these hearings. We strongly recommend that you maintain the percentage of ongoing solutions that are being proposed in this budget. Certainly, if you could increase it, we would also support that. Because, again, this is not just about July 1st, 2012. This is about the structural deficits that we're seeing year after year after year after that. And so it's about bringing the city back in fiscal sustainability, so we're not operating in crisis mode every year. We continue to urge that we work towards that 5% reserve fund. This budget gets us close to that. We would argue against any reductions of the reserve fund because it's such a critical part of our overall financing. We also recommend that should there be any one-time funding, that one-time funding be available to further strengthen the reserve fund to get to that 5% and to start building the stabilization fund, because we know there are liabilities out there that we will confront within the next 24 months. We recommend that if additions are made, that there are linked to actual deletions of equal value. We also would caution you against any speculative revenue and would argue against any deficit borrowing. Services should be restored or enhanced through ongoing sources of funding that are identified. And when you identify those new services to restore, that you not just consider it in the context of that particular department, that you look at it from the context of all the other departments that provide support. I know there's a discussion about enhancing fire services. It's not just about the fire department. It's about supporting other departments like GSD or personnel who would provide support services there. We recommend that while revenue projections are conservative, there really is little room left in the mid-year. You've had to confront year after year in the middle of the year deficits. This year's deficit was $72 million, and we had a little bit of wiggle room because we had assumed that the city would cover the ERIP costs for departments. As a solution, we asked each department to absorb those costs. We don't have that as a solution next year. So we have to maintain sort of a conservative approach on revenue, because that problem only surfaces again in the middle of the year when you have less time to deal with it. So any reductions that made have to be magnified at that time. And because there is some uncertainty around some sources of funding, particularly the CRA dollars, we are recommending that you identify a contingency plan now of what those reductions will look like should those revenues be reduced, should we have something unforeseen in the middle of the year, and that we establish triggers to address that in advance of those problems occurring. So with that, we'll be happy to respond to any questions, and I'd like to thank you for your attention and your support, and we look forward to this budget season.
Thank you very much, Mr. Santana and colleagues. With your indulgence, what I'd like to do is go directly to public comment now. And the way this is going to work is we're going to have public comment each day. We're going to have general public comment as well as public comment on any particular departments that you'd like to comment on that day, taken together. So if you'd like to comment on Mr. Santana's presentation or any of the particular departments that we're going to be discussing today, and that those departments, by the way, are going to be the City Controller, the City Attorney, the Office of Finance and Treasurer, and Lacers. Now is the time for those comments. So please fill out a card and bring it forward if you haven't already. And given how many cards we have here and how many people there are who would like to speak, I'd like to have a minute and a half per speaker. But when we come back and talk about the individual departments, I'm also going to ask for the, as appropriate, for the impacted labor organizations to have representatives come up and be able to provide a little bit more detailed discussion than you might normally have during a general public comment period, so that it can be part of the interactive dialogue. So the 1.5 minutes will not be the only time you'll have an opportunity to be heard if you're part of the representative organization. So we're going to start with Clive. Our first speaker is Clive Grawe. I think it is, G-R-A-W-E, it looks like, followed by Azar Nejad. Sir, welcome.
Hi, my name is Clive Grawe. I'm a 17-year transportation engineer for LADOT. I'm here to tell you that you need to stop attacking the workers. You've already extracted your 3 liters of blood. Any more will kill us. We have given you $847 million in concessions from our contract from last year. This included, we negotiated a contract that included 11% toward our pensions, which is, according to Councilmember Garcetti, is the second highest in the nation. We've already deferred our COLAs and raises for 3 years, and now you're asking us to defer them more. You need to put yourselves in our shoes, in my shoes. I had a kidney transplant 2.5 years ago. I'm on about 30 medications. For 2 years I was on furlough, making 10% less. I used to pay $10 for each medicine. That was about $300 a month. Now I pay $40. It's $1,200 a month. Now an additional 11% of my salary goes towards my pension. Yes, I'm lucky to be alive, but I don't deserve you have you change the rules and make me pay half salary for my health care. Now you're asking for more from our health care. Right here at one of the buttons it says instruct CAO to present health care plan design changes that will achieve additional structural changes in the program year 2013. This time, we need to stop attacking the workers and collect money from the revenues. We have got $360 million giveaways to AEG and other developers. We've got revenue we need to collect. Or if you're not concerned about city services such as traffic engineering, you can continue to cut. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Azar Nejad, followed by Charles Leone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Azar Nejad, MOU 8 from Transportation Engineer Associate from LADOT and a member of SEIU 721. Yes, $360 million of tax and fee subsidies to developers, AEG and Grand Wilshire hotels. Yes, millions of dollars of uncollected transient parking operators and business taxes. Yes, $644 million street services not applying for RR shovel-ready projects. Yes, $1 million of fees, reduced fees, the entertainment and film industry. No accountability system for subsidies and exemptions and uncollected taxes. Privatization, outsourcing, and contracting out. Debt services cost, so we have given to the financial sector, and we continue to do that. Let's take a look at Wells Fargo, Chase, and Citibank. What is the dollar amount in the budget that is being proposed in front of you? And yes, we cannot do privatization It is shameful to do privatization, outsourcing, and contracting out of taxpayer public service and infrastructure. No layoffs, no healthcare cuts. Blue Cross already has had 40% profiteering last year. We don't need to take care of them.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Charles Leone, followed by Philip Sugar. Mr. Leone? We'll come back to Mr. Leone. Next speaker is Philip Sugar, followed by Joshua Geller.
Good afternoon,
afternoon,
gentlemen. I think you all know me here, coming here asking you for sometimes millions of dollars to settle personal injury types lawsuits, but that's what we do. We provide you, without question, some of the best legal representation that can be bought for the dollars that we are given. Average attorneys out in the field, $250, $500 an hour. If you average out our cost to the city, maybe $70, $80 an hour. We are now reaching a stage where I really question whether or not we have the same resources that we've always provided to you to continue providing you with the type of legal representation that you, both as a council and individual members, deserve and entitled to. I'll give you an example of a case. I know Mr. Rosendahl is very familiar with a case called Patelski. It involved a young woman who was killed in his district, a tragic, tragic case. The attorney that handled that did a fabulous job. The only problem is he's retired. He hasn't been replaced now. Where am I going to find a replacement to handle a case of that magnitude? Unfortunately, Patelski's not the only case we have that's like that. We have multiple cases. Mr. Krikorian knows the case we just brought to him, double wrongful death, brain damage case. So now we are faced with a situation of not being able to give you the kind of representation that you need. We need our staff reinforced, brought up to standards that we need, and brought back up to the levels that are appropriate. I'm going to reserve some of my comments if I may speak later. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much, sir. Next speaker is Joshua Geller, and then I just saw Charles Leone come back in, so he will follow Mr. Geller. Mr. Geller, welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Joshua Geller, Deputy City Attorney. I'm one of the criminal directors of the City Attorneys Association. I am proud to have served as a prosecutor in the Van Nuys criminal branch for the entire 6 years that I have worked for the city. Clearly, public safety is a core service. It's an essential service. The mayor's budget puts a strong emphasis on public safety not being sacrificed. I'm here to tell you that the budget represents treating prosecutors for this city as the redheaded stepchildren of the public safety family. We're proud public servants who have chosen to serve the citizens of Los Angeles rather than pursue lucrative careers in the private sector in exchange for the gratification that comes with serving the public, as well as the promise of a fair pension when we retire. As you're all aware, we serve your constituents in very meaningful, significant ways. We prosecute the quality of life crimes that affect every citizen in this great city, not just victims of major homicide or an isolated, spectacular crime. These are the things that affect everybody's life every day, and I can guarantee that each one of you as well has been affected in some direct or meaningfully indirect way by the crimes that we're prosecuting. We are so severely understaffed on the criminal side. We are so severely pressed. We're working for free because we have to and because we serve the public beyond what the paycheck says and what the hourly wage says, because we have an ethical obligation to protect our clients. I appreciate your consideration, and I know you have a really tough job here today, and it's going to be a long 2 weeks, but I urge you to consider the full scope and meaning of public safety when you contemplate the city attorney's budget this year.
Thank you very much, sir. All right. Our next speaker is Charles Leone, followed by Corey Brent.
Honorable members of the Budget and Finance Committee, it's a pleasure to speak before you today. I am Charles Leone with SCIU 721. As the saying goes, liars figure and figures lie. When the CAO presents a budget to you that says that certain personnel in that department, you've got 30% more personnel today than you did in the early 1990s, and has you think that maybe that's something to feel good about, think about what the population of our city is compared to what it was in the early 90s. Our population in the city has grown, and we have had dramatic service levels that have dramatically decreased. The taxpayers that are in the various council districts, all 15 in the city of Los Angeles, those taxes haven't gone down. Those services have gone down. Think about certain departments like street services whose budgets have been cut almost 60% in the last 5 years. There's no need, no reason why the CAO is targeting positions in street services. We've got brothers and sisters in proprietary departments that have vacancies. So if the CAO won't let certain personnel in those general fund departments stay there, then please come on down and join us at the harbor because we'd love to have you. I want to speak about traffic officers. That's really also why I want to come before you today. There is a part-time traffic officer pilot program that is the brainchild of a former disgraced chief of parking and traffic enforcement, Jimmy Price. You might know his name because that was when the black cloud was over DOT and it was getting considerable coverage on CBS News. Traffic officers bring in $130 million of revenue to the city of Los Angeles. They do their part and they pay their fair share and do what they can to help sustain your general fund. You've got a part-time pilot program that needs to go. The CAO wants to expand it, wants to extend it. DOT hasn't been held accountable. It's cost neutral. Look at the third-party ACS report. It's dividing DOT. They pit workers against each other. They tell the full-timers, you're not doing like what the part-timers do. And please, let's end that program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Corey Brent, followed by Howard Fuchs.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Corey Brent. I supervise the police litigation unit in the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. I've been a member of the office for about 23 and a half years, and for the last 20 and a half years have dedicated myself to defending Los Angeles police officers in civil lawsuits. I supervise a unit of 14 lawyers who work tirelessly and effortlessly to try to defend Los Angeles police officers in very high exposure civil lawsuits. Some of them have come before you, so you're familiar with some of their facts. We're about to start another case this coming Tuesday in federal court on a very high exposure officer involved shooting. The lawyers in the police litigation unit as well as the office work a huge amount of overtime that they are not compensated for in any way, shape, or form. They work overtime that they don't get time on the books, they don't get credit for, they max out on overtime, yet they continue to come and work year after year after year to defend Los Angeles police officers. But eventually people get tired, they get worn out. You can only ask so much of people before they begin to break down. And when they break down and you break their spirit, you won't fix it. You'll never get the kind of lawyers and the kind of representation you get out of these police lawyers, no matter how much you pay. Please do not let the system break. Let us continue to represent you the way we've always represented you and the men and the women of the LAPD. That's what we want to do, and that's what we've always done. Please help us to do what we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Howard Fuchs, followed by Casey Shim.
Good afternoon. My name is Howard Fuchs. I'm a Van Nuys deputy. I've been with the office for 23 years. I have prosecuted over 250 court and jury trials. I am here to tell you that 3 years ago in Van Nuys we had 34 deputies. We now have 23 deputies, a loss of 33%. We handle between 15 and 17,000 open cases in Van Nuys alone, estimating about 35,000 cases that are handled in that courtroom. We are handling it not in 80 hours every 2 weeks, but in 68 and a half hours with 1/3 less people. The city has taken in 3,000 new prisoners, felons, that will be released relatively soon. They will be put back into the neighborhoods. Crime is estimated to increase by about 10% at that time. Remembering the city attorneys handle 70% of that crime that these people are going to commit. I tell you, the police are not furloughed. Criminals are not furloughed. I implore you not to furlough your city attorneys. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Casey Shim, followed by Onika Cole. Mr. Shim.
Good afternoon. When I walk into court and stand before a jury, I say, my name is Casey Shim, and I'm a deputy city attorney. It's my privilege to represent the city of Los Angeles. Our section, which is the police employment litigation section, defends the city against claims of discrimination, retaliation, and harassment by LAPD officers. Most of those cases, when they go badly, you read about them in the newspaper. When they go well, you don't hear about them. And I'm here to say that we're on the ragged edge. Because of my professional responsibilities, I do, and most of my colleagues do, work as many hours as it takes. Since 2008, that our caseload has remained about the same, and we have much to do all the time. We deal with deadlines every day. We deal with recalcitrant judges who are insensitive to our time needs because the courts themselves are in trouble as well. So, as I say, I wish I could do more civil procedure. I wish we had more people there so that maybe we could defeat some of these cases before we end up in trial. But unfortunately, I don't always have time to do that. Today is Friday. I get to say, thank God it's Friday, because that means there are only 2 more work days until Monday. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Onika Cole, followed by Amy Brothers.
Good afternoon. Thank you, members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Onika Cole, Monica without the M.
Sorry.
That's okay. Most people mispronounce it the first time. I am a deputy city attorney. I started with the office in March of 2002, and I'm currently assigned to the consumer fraud section. My section is one of the unique sections of the criminal branch that not only prosecutes people criminally, but we can actually file civil cases that can bring money to our office. I have been working part-time. Let me rephrase that. I've been paid part-time for full-time work. Many of the people in our section are only being paid 68.5 hours for every 2 weeks, but work well in excess of that. There is a huge donut hole in our office where we're forced, because of our own sense of professionalism and ethics, to work for free between 68.5 and 80 hours. I prosecute people who do things like practice law and medicine and dentistry without a license. I put bus drivers who drive school children without driver's license or allow criminals to be bus drivers in jail and on probation. I do work that can bring large sums of money to the general fund. Please make me a full-time employee so I can increase the money that I bring back to the general fund. I want to do my fair share. We are working hard for you, and we want to continue doing that.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Amy Brothers, followed by Arturo Martinez. Welcome.
Good afternoon, committee members. I am Deputy City Attorney Amy Brothers. I've been a member of the City Attorney's Office for 10 years now. I'm currently in the Land Use Division. We advise and represent the city and its departments on land use matters, ordinances, and litigation. These are essential services. The litigation we defend is typically that challenging land use ordinances and other land use approvals and disapprovals. For example, we're currently handling 76 lawsuits challenging the medical marijuana ordinance. We are also the unit handling the massive billboard litigation that we've seen repeatedly and constantly over the last 5 years. The litigation has to be a priority for us, but with the shortage of resources, unfortunately, other aspects of our job have taken a back seat. Just as one example, although my land use colleagues and I routinely work through our furloughs and well beyond 80 hours of pay period, since mid-2009, we have been unable to physically staff the area planning commissions. That should be a financial concern to all of us. A substantial portion of the litigation we defend arises directly out of the area planning commission actions. This is a risk to the public purse that can be alleviated with increasing the number of lawyers we have in the office. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Arturo Martinez, followed by Andre Quintero. Mr. Martinez, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Commission, I'm here to talk about the preservation of the City Attorney's Office. My name, again, is Arturo Martinez. I've been with the office almost 14 years. I have served the city in our gang prosecution unit as well as our neighborhood prosecutor program, and prior to that as a line prosecutor in our central trials downtown. The one key component that's been discussed this morning, especially with the CAO, is the preservation of core functions in public safety. How can you have core function and public safety without the attorneys that represent the people that do that work? Police officers make arrests. You heard from my colleague that 70% of those arrests go to the city attorney's office. It's the attorneys in my office that handle those cases. And without attorneys and without staff, we can't properly or nearly get to all the cases that are out there. And a good percentage of those cases are quality of life crimes. And those are the crimes that concern your constituents. Those are the phone calls that you get. Those are the phone calls that we address and we help you take care of. Now, something else that comes with public safety. Those police officers work very, very hard, doing a very good job. However, there come times that they unfortunately subject us to liability. As my colleague Corey Brent mentioned, there's a lot of work that goes into representing the LAPD, both in righteous claims and those claims that aren't righteous. Now, I want to draw your attention back to this last Tuesday. The full council, Councilmember Cardenas, and members of this commission were very kind enough to recognize the City Attorney's anti-gang section for all its hard work. We handle gangs, guns, and graffiti on behalf of the city, as well as restorative justice issues. I don't believe that this council and this commission would have recognized us if it wasn't true that we work very hard. And I just want you to consider that as you consider the budget going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Andre Quintero, followed by Heinrich Kiefer. Okay, we'll come back to Mr. Quintero. Mr. Kiefer?
Thank you, members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Heinrich Kiefer, 32-year resident of Highland Park and a member of the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocate team. I realize it's a really hard time. I want to congratulate the CAO and the Mayor's Budget team on bringing forth a budget that I agree with about probably 95%. Although I have sympathy for many of our workers, I was in the plumbing business for over 20 years. I realize that generally speaking, you want good people, you want to take good care of them, pay them good wages. But I think we're at a crisis where it becomes maybe not so much that we're going to take from them, but we're going to reduce them, and we're going to have to do more with less. And so that's really the challenge that labor has. Are they willing to make a concession, or are they willing to see some of their fellow members fall by the wayside? So it's a really tough time, and it's going to be hard decisions, but very challenging work, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Alan Peshek, and then we can try again with Andre. Please, we're not going to have any booing in here. We're not going to have any booing throughout the entire time of these hearings. I'm going to tell you that right now. Our next speaker is Alan Peshek, followed by Andre Quintero, if he's here. Mr. Peshek, welcome.
How do you do? My name is Alan Peshek. I work for the Department of General Services, LA City. Been here 17 years. How can you provide proper staff for LAPD and get things done without the clerical? You're putting cops behind desks. They need to be on the street so they can respond properly. We had an agreement a while back. We deferred our raises, we deferred our step increases. We saved the city money. Somebody made a decision to save $12 million by 160 layoffs, which triggered $90 million in raises, over 22,000 employees. Who made that decision? We'd still be saving the city money. There's a gentleman in here that made a comment. If we're back in a year, I haven't done my job. I'm sorry, sir, you need to step down.
Knock down.
Our next speaker is Mr. Quintero here? Andre Quintero? Okay. Our next speaker is Cheryl Parisi, followed by Jim McQuiston. And Ms. Parisi, I know that you submitted 2 cards, but I don't know if you caught it when I said it. We're doing this collectively, and then as need be, when we come up and talk about the departments, I'll have labor representatives participate in that conversation as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I just wanted to speak, let me just speak generally about the sacrifices that the 22,000 men and women who are members of the LA City Coalition of Union have made over the last several years in order to get us to a place where, as the CAO announced, we have the largest reserve fund in the history of the city. That is a remarkable achievement. However, I think that reserve fund may come at a price. And so I'm asking today that as you move through the budget hearings that this committee be scrupulous about analyzing and forcing departments to disclose the impact of each and every layoff that's proposed. We are enormously frustrated as we read the budget book to see virtually no description of the service impacts of these layoffs. It's critical. As you said, we are at the lowest civilian employment levels since the Tom Bradley administration, with a population in the city of Los Angeles that has grown enormously. Virtually every civilian job that's left is critical. It's performing essential services, and we ask that there be absolute scrutiny applied to an analysis of the impact of each and every layoff. I want to talk specifically, too, about a couple of things that the CAO raised, particularly as it relates, number one, to city civilian pensions. Have a minute?
Just if you could wrap it up, yeah.
We did pension reform. We came to the bargaining table and mutually negotiated increased contributions to our pension system. And beginning this fiscal year, 1 year later, we are already seeing the fiscal savings. Civilian pension costs for the city of Los Angeles are reduced in this budget by $63 million. That is a remarkable achievement. We are proud of that fact. We want those dollars programmed to save our jobs and the services that we provide. We did pension reform, it's done, and we are mutually achieving the benefit of those actions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker is Jim McQuiston, followed by Daniel Weissman.
Jim McQuiston. As most of you know, I'll be putting in my comments in writing. So I just want to say we're going through the water torture because we didn't think about the fact that in 1976 our budgets were balanced. When Mayor Hahn was mayor, we had a $1 billion surplus one year, and now we don't have any because we don't keep our income coming up equal to the cost of living increase. And there was an out on that, and we didn't do it. And I'm not going to talk until Mr. Trutanich either wins or loses the election, but we have to get on the lawsuit immediately after that.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Daniel Weissman, followed by Alice Goff.
Thank you much, Mr. Krikorian and members of the committee, all gathered here. I think it's time now to set the tone of this. You're doing that, of course, and to the extent I'd like to participate in that. There are two definitions I think we need to keep in front of ourselves as this process goes forward. One is the definition of a professional, and the other is Einstein's definition of insanity. I think most of you know Einstein's definition of insanity. I'll quote it in a moment. A professional is an individual whose primary goal is for the benefit of his client. Elected officers appointed and salaried employees of this city, you people are all professional. And every one of you have my respect and my great appreciation for what you do. But you have to keep in mind why you are here. You are here to serve the people of this city and not to serve your own individual needs. Now, I'll be glad to get some applause for that statement. Anyway. Now, I'm speaking both as an individual and as a member of the budget advocates who've been working very hard to try to understand this budget. And Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result every time. And that's what we've been doing. And we're at the end of the road. We can't do those same things over and over again. I see my time is about up. The other kind of comments will have to come in other moments of public comment. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Alice Goff, followed by Glenn Bailey. Ms. Goff, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Alice Goff. I'm the president of AFSCME, Local 3090, representing the clerical and support services employees. And in the general comments, I guess I need to put in a different card for the Office of Finance specifically. But in general, of the number of layoffs proposed, the clerical unit is disproportionately targeted. 88% of those positions are represented by the clerical unit. Obviously, a large number of that, probably 80% or more, are female. These are traditionally female-dominated positions. The work that's done is critical in the police department. Last budget cycle, when I spoke about the elimination of the vacant positions, the department has said that, there would be no problems. Those positions, the work would not be backfilled by police officers. They are, in fact, today being done, many of them by police officers, because, again, they are all critical positions that have the work. The work doesn't go away even when you remove the bodies, and especially in a department, the police department, where they have traditionally had problems filling positions because of the stringency of the background requirements. And so just in an overall, the disproportionate number targeted on the clerical and support services unit and the type of work that's done. I'll come back to the Office of Finance.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Glenn Bailey, followed by Paul Castro. Mr. Bailey, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee member, present. My name is Glenn Bailey. I am a board member of on the Encino Neighborhood Council representing Area 1. I also served as one of the Neighborhood Council budget advocates representing the South Valley area. And I wanted to take this a few seconds just to thank some of the departments that we met with to find out their concerns, answer questions. And the ones I participated in include Department of Transportation, Sanitation, Street Services, Neighborhood Empowerment, City Attorney, and City Controller. And also the Mayor's budget team and CAO also met several times as well. In my remaining few seconds, I just wanted to comment with regards to one of the departments you're considering today, the City Attorney. One of the issues we discussed was the ACE program. And it's rather controversial. There's some for, some against. But I think in order to move forward, we need a better understanding that this is not to raise money, because even though publicly it's said it's not to raise money, it's to solve the problem. I would agree with that. But we also need a definition of what the specific issues are and which departments, specifically listing the municipal codes. And we tried to get that from some of the departments, and we were not able to. Each was pointing their finger at the other. So to move ahead on that, and I know it's the City Attorney's Office, along with Mr. Koretzer, pushing that, I would ask that we list the specific municipal code sections for each of the particular departments so it's publicly vetted. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is, I'm sorry, I can't tell if it's Paul or Raul Castro, followed by Jacob Miller. Sorry, sir, I couldn't make it out.
Paul Castro.
Thank you. Welcome.
I am confused as to the definition of public safety, because when the fire department warned you that they would have a 15% reduction in their response time, you went ahead with the brownouts. When the 911 operators were furloughed, who do you think was answering the phone when people needed help? We provide critical services to the city of LA. We have made sacrifice year after year. There are members of the council in the chambers who never made the same sacrifice. It's important that you consider all the work that we do and how valuable it is. And for civilian employees, we're done making concessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jacob Miller, followed by Noel Weiss.
Hello, my name is Jacob Miller. I'm an animal care technician for Los Angeles Animal Services for the last 10 years. Let me tell you this, we are cut to the bare bone and we can't handle any more reductions. You will hear throughout this process the idea of alternative service delivery models to enhance services. Mr. Krikorian, is your district getting better services? The stats will show that the recent deal for animal services hasn't enhanced or improved anything. You aren't getting more services. Adoptions aren't higher. Best friends aren't helping more now that we are paying their utilities than they were before the deal. Since opening with our most adoptable animals, they have only placed a little over 300 since late January. East Valley Animal Shelter has placed over 511 just for the month of March alone. All that aside, it proves to all of you, including you, Mr. Koretz, that LAAS's GM is giving you bad advice and recklessly inflated hopes that no one does the job better than city workers across all departments. Mr. Santana, you need to do your job, you need to collect those debts, you need to close this budget gap, you need to turn it into a surplus. The money's out there, we need you to do your job. We cannot do any more privatization, it doesn't help anything. Inflated hopes don't save animals, city workers do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker is Noel Weiss, followed by Verdell Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Rosendahl, it would be nice if he was listening to public comment. Thank you. What is the role of the city attorney? The role of the city attorney is not to protect the political interests of council members. I think that you have a lot of hardworking people in that city attorney's department, but I don't think you people, when Mr. Koretz gives away variances and requires the city attorney to have to defend, when Mr. Rosendahl makes judgments that basically cause the city attorney to have to defend lawsuits and spend money, that's not right. And basically what I want to propose, you have indemnity agreements, and you know what, Mr. Lowen, you can laugh, but the bottom line is, you've got indemnity agreements in those land use entitlements. And you know what those indemnity agreements say? They say that the applicant is supposed to reimburse the city for all of the costs, and that includes planning and the city attorney, for the cost of defending those lawsuits. When was the last time the city attorney or this council or anybody ever went after those monies? And do you know what? If in fact those people had to pay, there'd be a lot less negative action or shall we say special interest action by this council, and a lot more positive action on behalf of the true purpose and intent. There's too much giveaways, there's too much political interest, and you guys are putting the city attorney in a tough position, and that includes the conflicts of interest that you're imposing on the city attorney relative to having to defend conflicting interests, be it the proprietary departments in the city, be it the pension plans in the city. And lastly, with my last 10 seconds, I think you need to consider what you're doing and why, people. And the bottom line is, relative to when you pass legislation, there needs to be a premium, a litigation premium associated with it, so that you understand what you're doing, and hopefully you can get the biggest bang out of the buck from the city attorney's office.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Verdell Flores, followed by Andre Quintero, if he's come back.
Verdell Flores, I'm a librarian. I'm also the Health and Safety Chair for the Librarians Guild Local 2626, which is an ASME local. Again, I would like to just reiterate what I heard was that the CAO and the mayor both said if they had to come back to the city unions, they were not doing their job. So I hope that this committee and the city council will remember those words and ask the CAO and the mayor why they have not done their job in the last year. I also am asking this Budget and Finance Committee to relook at the motion that was passed at the public safety meeting earlier this morning, because the CAO it was approved in concept, the consolidation of OPS into LAPD, but the very next line, which was not stated, was to authorize LAPD to move forward with that consolidation. So how can you approve in concept and then authorize to move forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Quintero returns? Okay. So just to clarify, because I think I might not have been as clear as I might have earlier, because I know we're getting some additional cards in. As we go through each department, and as members ask questions of each department, we're going to have a dialogue that's going to include a representative of the impacted labor organization. I didn't mean to suggest that we're going to reopen public comment to anybody who wants to talk about that, but we are going to have a dialogue which will be a more meaningful dialogue than I think a quick minute-long statement that you can make from the podium. So the idea is that we'll have, especially as members have questions that they want to present to labor representatives, we'll invite you to come on up and participate in the conversation. Okay, so that's what I meant to explain, not that we're going to have additional cards from additional speakers as we go forward on each item. All right, so that'll close public comment for this session, and members, I wanted to afford you all the opportunity to ask any questions that you might at this point of Mr. Santana generally, and then we'll go directly to the City Controller presentation. So, members, Mr. Rosendahl.
Yeah, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I just want to be clear on this one chart page to begin with, page 18. Where it says the 2012-2013 proposed authorized positions. My real question is, how many are filled with people? Like, for instance, the LAPD, just as an example, it says 3,169. Now, does that mean there are 3,169 people in that position, or are those authorized positions but not necessarily with people? I just need to know, the facts about real people in real jobs when we talk about the 159 that we're talking about eliminating. These are real people, the 159. They're people. And does that mean the 3,169 are all real people, or does it mean, a different number? I just want to know if these numbers in the proposed authorized position are filled with employees, so I get a real appreciation of the dimensions.
It varies from department, and so what we'll do is for Monday we'll submit a specific report that adds an additional column that compares the number of positions that are filled that will be eliminated, the total authorized, and those that are vacant, so that you get a comprehensive picture.
Yeah, because the clarity is the most important part in this process again this year, because as we scrub the numbers and look at these issues, like I also said before, what functions do these people have? And if it delays something, is that a delay, a safety delay? And each issue has its components that say that. So, that is something extremely important for us to even understand if we're policymakers, and we have to make some
So what we'll do in the context of each department, we'll specify specifically the number of positions that are filled and versus vacant.
Councilmember. Ben Sehel with the CAO. In every financial status report that's presented before this committee and ultimately council, we include an employment level report. That employment level report includes the number of filled positions for each department. So the last one we have on file is actually from the mid-year report, which was in March 2012, so just a month ago. And so, for example, at that time, the number of filled positions at the end of December for the police department, and this is civilian, was 2,846. The number of vacancies was 369. So this is an employment level report that's presented in each of the financial status reports that come to your committee. So what we can do is we could attempt to do a revision and present it back to this committee before the hearings are over.
Great. And again, also, as I had mentioned before about the various positions, a definition of what every job that has a person in it now that is being proposed to be eliminated, what are their specific functions? When they say clerk or typist or whatever, I want to know what that role is, and I don't want a commitment from the LAPD that a sworn officer will end up in that position. I mean, it just has to appreciate the value of civilians. Just like anecdotally I'll say about the fire department. When I went over to the shop to see who was working what, and the shop is the backup to the equipment, and saw that there were authorized positions at a certain level, filled positions at another level, and then meaningful jobs that weren't filled that are essential to the mission, and so on and so forth. So on each department, when you hear the various union folks get up and talk about various things, the more the data is as clear as we can scrub it at that moment, the more help it will be.
We'll do it per department.
Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Kretz.
No microphone. There it is. There it is. On that point, I want to know not just the functions. I think the real key, and something we've probably missed in past years, is when we lay off this position, are we actually not going to do the work? Or is the work still going to be done, and who would be doing it? So, for instance, if we lay off 150 clerks in the LAPD, but we've decided we're not eliminating any of their functions, does that just mean that sworn officers pick up their work, or does it not? Because my fear is that as LAPD tries to keep to the magic number of around 10,000 officers, that we continue to uncivilianize, maintain a more costly and more well-trained, but not necessarily on-point workforce in those 10,000 officers. If we cut 150 clerks and we have officers that are paid considerably more doing that work, that only digs us in a bigger hole just for optics. And that's my particular concern, especially with the LAPD. I want to know that, and I object to this anyway, I can't imagine there's any way this is going to play out well for us, that those positions are unnecessary, and that is work that doesn't need to be continued. Because if it does, and we're just giving it to someone else we pay more, there's no way that makes sense in a budget crisis to increase our expenses for the same people and the same functions. So that's one piece. Also, I know, among other things, the GRID program is now going on the general fund dime and out of the mayor's office. Does that mean that now that it's out of the mayor's office, that it can be audited? Because I believe it wasn't previously.
No, the GRID program is still part of the general fund.
It is part of the general
yes.
fund. Has it ever been audited?
Audited by the city controller, not
Yes.
to my knowledge.
And would that be because it was in the mayor's office?
Councilman, I believe the LA Bridges program, back when it was in our community development department, was audited probably more than once. To the extent that GRID has been audited while it's been in the mayor's office, I can get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kretz. Mr. England, do you have anything at this point for the CAO?
Just wanted to say I appreciate all the folks that have come forward earlier to speak as well. I think there was a lot of very meaningful input and concern that was brought forward that will resonate throughout these budget proceedings, quite frankly. I think a lot of the questions that pertain specifically to the layoffs and those folks who are going to be doing those jobs now that those layoffs are being suggested will be asked of every general manager coming forward. So I do appreciate that. I did not fall on deaf ears. I also appreciate all the work of the CAO's office as well as the CLA's office in putting this budget together in difficult times. As we heard, moving forward, we've got these structural deficits in years to come as well, and we're going to have to absorb that. There's a new normal, and we haven't hit that normal yet. There's a new low baseline, and we're all impacted and affected. And so I just wanted to share my gratitude for the city workers as well as our extended staff and our new chairman of the Budget Committee, who has really taken on a tremendous load in hitting the ground running with this. Has put a lot of effort and energy in his preparation as well, and look forward to his leadership through the next couple weeks to get us through this. And truly appreciate your guidance and leadership. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
If I could, I think in response to Councilman Koretz, GRID was indeed audited by the City Controller's Office, and I believe this will be up on Thursday. The GRID will be part of the General City Purposes discussion. We can provide more information at that time.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Santana. Oh, you know what? Before you go, Mr. Santana, I don't want an answer to this now because we're getting a backlog of general managers that are coming now. So I want to just put a couple things out on the record. You talked about the critical importance of the reserve fund and continuing to fund it, and that is clearly true. My philosophy on the reserve fund is that we do need a more robust reserve, but at the same time, that is also a budget decision that we're making of one budget value versus other budget values that we have to make some kind of a quantitative determination about. So when we come back with our reports back, I'd like to have a little bit more analysis of what the cost impacts are of a potential downgrade and what quantification of risk is there at each reduction of that reserve fund. How much more likely is a 4.8 reserve fund to achieve a downgrade than a 4.927%, for example? I want to understand that better so that we can put a real dollar figure on the risk or benefit of more funding for the reserve fund so that we can make a comparison of that risk versus the risk of loss of services that we're experiencing and the cost implications that has by not diverting that money to I shouldn't say diverting, but not making that budget choice. So that's number one. And then the other issue I wanted to ask about was I guess I can wait for the departments. So that was the only thing for now. So thank you very much. Controller first. Okay. So I see that we have our city attorney here. We also have our city controller here. I'm told that the city controller is going to have a very, very brief presentation on her budget. So why don't we go ahead and invite up our city controller, Wendy Gruhl, if you would please come forward. And we're delighted to have you here. Controller Gruhl, welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corning. Congratulations on being the chair of this committee and how much fun it gets to be.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. And you missed my introductory comments about how we're going to try to move things through. So you don't even really need to do any introductory comments. You may if you'd like, but you certainly are not expected to. You can go straight into whatever it is that you want to that's most important to you.
Great, and I will try to be brief, and I appreciate you trying to move quickly through everything. I want to just have two hats on. I guess it's the same hat as city controller. One is overall as the financial watchdog and others as the managers of the city's general fund cash flow, and then two as a general manager as a department and the impacts and as well. So that's what if I can, I want to deal with both of those. And as the department that also is responsible for putting forward on March 1st our revenue projections. And of course the revenue projections that the CAO has now has the benefit of additional information they may have received since March 1st. particularly that includes business tax, property tax, for better or worse, in the last few months, some of those numbers. So I just want to give that as a precursor.
Thank you.
While we've begun to see signs of a slow and steady economic recovery, we do believe that challenging economic times will be our city's norm for a number of years to come. Combined with a budget with expenditures that outpace city revenues, the city will continue to be confronted with difficult decisions. As I mentioned, as the financial watchdog and managers of the city's general fund cash flow, I'm always, as you are as well, compelled to remind you about the importance of having a sustainable and responsible budget that will carry us into the future securely, and making sure that we look at not short-term but long-term fixes to our structural problems. I've always been an advocate for a strong reserve fund to maintain that, and a 5% reserve fund is critical for that goal to get us towards that, to a stronger fiscal position. It also serves as an indicator of the city's financial health, especially when it comes to the city's bond rating. As I mentioned in revenue, it's always important to have realistic revenue estimates. We estimated a modest growth over the next year, and I always like to say that we want to make sure we are cautiously optimistic as we go forward, but keeping watch on those city revenues as they materialize or not, and working very closely with our city administrative officer as well. I know in your budget that you have the mayor has proposed to eliminate over 600 positions with over 200 layoffs. As I'm sure you agree as well, layoffs and cuts in city services should be the last resort, not a first resort. I've worked very closely with many of you in this room on the issues of waste, fraud, and abuse, and identified about $130 million in savings and solutions. In no means will that you can say tomorrow, because I know we've talked about this, Miguel, that you could tomorrow say, oh, I can pull out $130 million, but there are clearly some areas in that, in working with the Audits and Government Efficiency Committee and the Mayor's Office and the CAO and others, ways in which I believe we can also look in finding revenue in those ways. I don't believe that the layoffs are what the city wants, or those of us, because it is going to be a diminished services for our residents of Los Angeles. It's incumbent upon all of you and the rest of us to look and to perform our due diligence to ensure that no layoffs occur before we've looked at every other option available to us. And I know that's what you're going to be discussing in the next several days. And clearly, I have been a proponent, and I know the CAO has been a proponent of ensuring that we try to not have as many discretionary funds, revenue diversion, and that we look and putting all of those into the general fund, something I proposed as a city council member and continue to do as the city controller. This includes everything from real property trust funds, AB 1290, street furniture funds, and others that are put in different categories. I know that one of the recommendations is for the SPRF to also go into the general fund, and I've been a proponent of that as well. I think that as we look at the city government, our job really is to protect our people and keep our neighborhoods safe, and believe that putting these layoffs first is not going to be the right approach. I do want to say, and I'm sure the CAO and others probably have seen the audit that was performed by my office a few years ago that identified hundreds of positions that could be filled with civilians, and that to utilize our resources more effectively, keeping police on the streets and not behind desks was an important recommendation from that audit. And to ensure that any decision that is made on particular eliminations, that you look at what the impact is going to be and the service that would be cut, and whether or not a police officer would be placed in that position. And the audit that we have, I think, hopefully would be useful in that way. And I think that we have to look at a real plan to create new jobs, and jobs that are going to provide the services that are important. Economic development, just very briefly, I know that in the budget there is money from the CRA and the changes that have been made, the importance of looking at a long-term proposal on economic development, and that it's an opportunity. I'm a someone who thinks the glass is half full always. It is an opportunity for us to have a discussion about where economic development is going to occur in the future and how we do it more effectively and efficiently, even with the demise of the CRA, and really to look at some innovative new ideas and thinking outside the box. Because we know that the jobs that are being created are so critically important to the livelihood of our residents, but more importantly, the revenue. I always say we have a revenue and an expenditure problem. If we can create more jobs and have more revenue in the city of Los Angeles, we're able then to provide the services because people are out there spending their money, and then we get the sales tax, of course, property tax, if they're able to purchase a home as well. There is an important item, I'm talking fast just so we can get through this, an important item in this budget. I want to thank the CAO, I want to thank the Mayor's Office of including the performance-based budgeting. Not as a pilot program, and of course Mr. Englander, who introduced the motion, had it before his committee as well, is to not a pilot program but a phase-in approach. The two departments that we have, of course, are planning and street lighting, and to look at core services, the performance of that department, how much we're spending on each service, because as I always look at these, how many do we have, 5, 6 books? It's hard to say what exactly for each department without having to go to Appendix B, C, D, and understand exactly how we're holding the departments accountable and all of us accountable, that the money's going for the core services that are important to the city of Los Angeles, which I always think is, of course, public safety, public works, and economic development. I know that, again, I know you all have very tough decisions, and in this area, and there are some days I miss City Council and other days not. So I want to tell you a little bit about, just quickly, on the controller, and this is more specific to my office. With the budget cuts we're receiving this year, it brings us to a 28% reduction in our overall staff over the last 3 years. I have to say that I have expressed this both to the mayor and the CAO, that any further reductions would put the city at risk and jeopardize our ability to meet payroll obligations every 2 weeks, pay vendors, and the like. Because no matter how many cuts we have, we still have to provide for that payroll every 2 weeks, and I know all of you around this table and in this room appreciate that as well. Over the next year, the city must continue to pay employees and vendors, close the current fiscal year, prepare the preliminary financial report, prepare the state controllers and state street reports, and prepare the comprehensive annual finance report and single audit. We're spread thin, but we successfully implemented the new financial management system. I want to thank ITA and, of course, CAO and others in the CLA last July. You read nothing about it in the papers, which is the good news. We made that transition, and all of the staff in the city of Los Angeles who helped us do that. My office relies very heavily on the cooperation and receipt of information from other departments, primarily accountants and system staff citywide. The ongoing impacts of senior staff departures continue to create a risky shift in our organization. Our dependence on information that we receive from departments and the loss of staff citywide has made it very difficult for us to meet our state, federal, and our own charter requirements, including our March 1st revenue forecast, on which you depend each year. Obviously, it is critically important that my office has the resources brought to bear for the required expertise for the financial audits function of my office. It's a proven fact that risk increases in times of fiscal crisis, and with the loss of those that perform the core functions, we're in a vulnerable position. As you have seen from my recent audits, there are real risks that result from a decline in internal controls and a lack of staff to implement established controls. As you all read, our recent fuel audit, followed by news of stories of the federal government employees caught selling fuel and pocketing the money, continues to be concerns of making sure that we are watching in the city of Los Angeles how we operate. I think that the CLA has pointed out in their report the amount of money in the budget for petroleum may be insufficient if fleet services reductions are not achieved or if gas prices continue to increase. I hope you share my concern in that area. And just to note that when I started as city controller 3 years ago, we had 43 positions in the auditing division. We now have 12 operating auditors. If you look at the industry standard, it's 6 for every billion. That would be at least 42 in my office. If you didn't included the proprietary departments, which are, of course, there's an expectation of us doing Harbor, Airport, and DWP at the same level we would like to do, we should have 120. So we have 12 auditors. And again, We have, over the years, accepted the cuts, that 28%, and still tried to do as much as we possibly could in that area. My last, I have a request, which we have made in the last couple of years, which is reappropriating our unexpended funds to allow for us to provide some of those auditing functions and for some of those expertise that we will need, including the financial audits and, of course, the accounting resource pool, which we initiated with cooperation and coordination with the CAO, which is having accountants that we can use and pool to different departments when there's a high demand. And we've used retired employees that have come in and been able to do that. It has served, I think you would say as well, Miguel, that it has served us in making sure that we are able to perform the kinds of services that are necessary. And that would allow us to hiring those retired accountants and financial management employees for that short-term cyclical needs of the city departments. We would also ask the council that once the budget has been adopted, that we have the flexibility in the controller's office for backfilling positions, not having to go through that managed hiring process. So those would be our two requests. Of course, there are no bright spots in these deliberations, but only difficult choices so that the city can get back on a financial footing so that we can see better days ahead. Again, I will reiterate the importance of ensuring that everything be done to not lay off employees in the city of Los Angeles to performing those duties. Secondly, to ensure, particularly when we look at the police department, for those positions that would have to otherwise be filled by police officers, and the limitation that will be for the city to perform, I think, the necessary services. And I think as well that we will work closely to ensure that the dollars that we're anticipating receiving for the revenue, that we look closely and monitor and let you know. I mean, gone are the days where you adopt the budget in May and then you look back in January of the next year to see where you are. I think one of the important items that took place while I was here on this body as well was not only the financial policies, but also the more frequent information and interaction that is critical to do. So I'm here to be helpful and work with you and to ensure that we can provide the services necessary and treat our employees fairly as well at the same time.
Great.
So thank you for your time letting me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Controller Drill. Members? Mr. Englander.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Just a couple quick questions on first, I'm glad you mentioned the reserve fund as well as being critically important. It's ironic that we're $16 million short of the 5% goal, yet the assessor called and said we're $16 million short in our property tax revenue. Just happens to be the same number. The line item on 132 in the Blue Book, number 5, has a $90,000 set aside for a CRA audit. But with the CRA gone now, is that something that can be eliminated? Is there still a need to conduct that audit?
And I'm sorry I don't have the book in that. You can go ahead, Claire.
Okay.
Claire has it in front of her. I'm joined by Claire Bartels and Javon.
It's a consultant for CRA audits, and it's at $90,000.
Correct. We anticipate, we actually have confirmed with the city attorney that the obligation to audit the CRA is from the period of June 30th to the date of the dissolution of the CRA this year, 2012. So there will be an audit obligation.
It's not a, maybe we can explain this, Claire, as well. It's not a audit that we, each year when we decide what our plans are for the future, we have a work plan and we determine priorities. This is separate from that kind of a audit. This is a required audit that we do, financial audit that we're required to do at the CRA.
I got it. Okay. Thank you. And then
but if there's again, if it doesn't cost us as much and all that, we're always willing to look at if there's a shorter period of time.
Got it. Thank you. And then my only other question was on the FMS system, which you'd mentioned. I understand that ITA has not yet signed a service level agreement for the in-house service and administering the system. Do you have any insight? I'll plan on asking them as well when they come forward. But
we're working on that to finalize it with them. So I don't think we anticipate any problems with our ability to do that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosendahl.
Yes, please. Good afternoon. Good to
Good
see you.
afternoon, you too.
I just want to make sure the proposed budget highlights say the deletion of general fund vacancies, 5, deletion of 23 resolution authority positions, 17 positions from the financial management system are continued as regular authority positions. Funding is continued and increased for the FMS, overtime, printing, binding, and contractual services, office administration expense account. Here are the questions, and if you don't have answers, get back to us, Hannah, because this is an opening. How will the financial management system implementation be affected by the mayor's proposed budget?
I'm gonna just so on the FMS and we are now in this last year, both ITA and the Controller's Office assumed some of those responsibilities as well as some of the staff positions to maintain that FMS system, because it's not just its implementation on July 1 of this last year, but it is also the ongoing maintenance of that. And so we've tried to, as much as possible, reduce the number but still maintain it. So Claire, I don't know if you want to give on the numbers, particularly.
The implementation team for FMS was funded at 23 positions. They were there being 17 of which are being converted to regular positions. So we have reduced for the through efficiencies, and we are properly staffed at 17 to continue for the next year.
Okay, I like that we're properly staffed. Your contractual service expenses are well over $1 million. Can you explain that figure?
For the FMS?
For the contractual service expenses.
Oh, in total. So that includes, for us, if you look at that audits on that same page, at page 132, we have the consultant for the CRA, we have the professional education requirement of $50,000, and then the outside audit resources, which is a $500,000 that exists there. That is, again, we have consistently been under budgeted for that amount from the days that my predecessor was here, asked for additional funds because that just isn't enough for us to be able to do some of the outside. It's why we have requested for those reappropriations each year. In essence, when we save money in our own department, can we use that to supplement that and allow us to have additional funds for those audits, because there are issues that come up that we need to quickly respond to, and that has been very helpful in us allowing us to do that. But it is, again, when we've gone down to 12 auditors, active auditors, when there was 45 when I started 3 years ago, it's a big difference.
Okay. My third question, I just have two more after this one. Please explain, using a city department that makes sense, your suggestion to analyze workforce productivity hours and costs so that we can continue to provide our core services.
So you're suggesting that potentially we would do an audit on the workforce productivity and see for a specific department that we would look at, see how we're performing the services?
Because it would be helpful for us to know that answer as we make decisions on it. What does this do for for the hours and the costs associated with it? How will this impact basic core services? Whatever you can analyze on those numbers obviously helps us understand the issue. What are your specific recommendations for how we can confront the issue of compensatory time off and or banked overtime? Which departments have the biggest hurdles to overcome? I'm not asking for the answer today. I'd like it back.
Okay, we'll get.
Okay? Yeah. And the last question is, how do you suggest we grow our reserve fund?
Well, I think, over the last several years, of course, they have gone, if you look at the numbers, the reserve fund has gone up now to this 4. We've reached probably the highest. I looked at the numbers before coming over here. Again, there's always that balance of reaching that goal and kind of that give and take, with the goal always being that 5%. So I think we've made major progress, something I've advocated over the years in that way. So I think it's moving slowly. If we'd gotten that more funds from the LA County assessor, we might have had more from the property tax.
Yeah. But just in conclusion, the third and the fourth point are the ones I'd like to call, the question about explain using city and departments that make sense, your suggestion to analyze workforce productivity hours and costs so that we continue to provide basic services, because that's a big one. And then what are the specific recommendations for how we can confront the issue of compensatory time off or bank time? It's another issue. And what departments have the biggest hurdles? So whatever you can get us on that helps us think it through.
Sounds like those should be
back
reports back. And Madam
Yes.
Controller, I think you missed when I mentioned to the CAO that as we look at the reserve fund, perhaps you could partner with him in this report back. One of the things that I would like to have a better quantification of is what are the risk elements and what's the actual quantification of that, of the cost of that risk if you don't reach 5% or if you fall just a bit below, or so that we can make the comparative judgment of investing more in a reserve fund or investing more in current services. We can't really do that in a vacuum by just picking an arbitrary number like 5%. So I'd like to have a better understanding of that. I think your input in it would be very helpful.
More than happy to.
Okay,
Yes.
Mr. Kretz, did you have a...
Yeah, I had a couple things. One, the controller recently sent us a letter explaining concerns about budgeted appropriations by city departments supported by the mayor council actions not being entered into the financial management system in a timely fashion, and that this backlog could negatively impact the timeliness of the information received by FMS, which can lead to delay of year-end closing activities, a loss of state and grant funding, which is obviously problematic, and could draw the attention of our city's bond rating agencies. The departments that are responsible for this backlog cite a shortage of accounting staff, the ongoing hiring freeze, ongoing furloughs as some of the reasons for the backlog. But as a result, the controller's office is delayed in processing final approvals. So in your letter, you suggest a few things that we might do to deal with this. Instruct all city departments to process FMS transactions resulting from mayor council fiscal actions within 10 working days of the approval date. Instruct the CAO to monitor and ensure timely data entry of budget adjustments by city departments, and request the controller to submit to the CAO a list of key vacant positions in the financial operations and financial reporting divisions, and authorize those positions to be exempt from the managed hiring process. Do you have any further comments on that particular issue?
Again, we did this. I think the CAO was familiar that we were sending out this letter because we did not want to be delayed. It's one of the reasons the accounting staff, that temporary accounting staff that we have recommended, that pool of resources is so critically important to get us through these. But I think what we wanted, again, is highlight that it is important for the departments when the council has taken an action that they implement them, because we can't actually send out the checks or do whatever we need to do unless the department sends the information to us. Information in allows us to do what we need to do. So we are just trying to start early and remind people that we know there are less staff, we know there are problems, but let's identify where those issues are now so that we can be helpful and work with the CAO's office to ensure we have the staff appropriate to make those inputs for us to perform our duties.
And obviously, if we have the potential to lose state funding and grant funding, it's not cost effective to allow this circumstance to continue. So I would ask that we request the CAO prepare a budget memo analyzing concerns raised by the controller and return to the budget committee with suggested ways to resolve the situation. Also, I'd like to lend my voice to Mr. Krikorian's comment about the reserves. I think reserves are important, and I could underscore that by the fact that in a previous city that I represented, we tried to set aside, on average, about 5% of our budget each year to add to the reserve. So clearly, I like that as a priority, but I think that right now, in the worst possible economic shortfall, now is not the time to be adding a significant amount to our reserves as a high priority. So I think we clearly need to add something to show momentum, But I think we also need to consider whether we want to add this amount or a lesser amount, and indeed whether anyone will care as long as we're showing that we're continuing to move in the right direction.
We'll
Okay.
work with the CAO.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Controller Gruhl.
Thank you
Appreciate
very
being
much.
here. Thank you very much for your time. I'd now like to invite up our City Attorney, the Honorable Carmen Trutanich, who comes with senior management of the City Attorney's Office, it looks like. Mr. Trutanich, welcome.
I don't know. I'll find out after this.
Mr. Trutanich, welcome. Good to have you here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for having me here today. It's a very good-looking committee that you have assembled.
Thank you. And by the way, let me tell you, I appreciate that Mr. Carter, on your behalf, sent a letter already to the committee about your budget, and I appreciate that you did that. Not everyone has, and so I appreciate that you've provided that to us in advance.
Listen, our department, sort of like a begrudging acceptance. We're not happy, but we're thankful that we're somewhat being left alone. No one likes furloughs, at least not the people that work for me, given the amount of hours they're putting in. But we're happy that the mayor saw fit to eliminate the layoffs, because had we experienced 63 positions of layoffs, this department would have been DOA at this hearing. There was just absolutely no way that we could experience 63 layoffs. And I met with the mayor, and he reduced furloughs by 2 days. And overall, I think we have a 3.76 increase, which pales in consideration to some departments, but I much prefer furloughs than layoffs. I would rather have none. This is going to get us through this year. The budget that is proposed, if it remains the way it is right now, it will get us through. It will not, like Mr. Englander today came to me and asked me for something on an ordinance. And I had 2 or 3 councilmen ask me, where is this ordinance? Well, it's been in the office for 2 months. The focus of our office, and I'm going to give you some numbers so that you'll know. The focus of our office is no longer service to the council. Our focus of our office is defending the Treasury and public safety. Public safety is number one. That means we need to make sure that the crime rate in Los Angeles and the citizens are safe. We worked with Councilman Rosenthal's office on 3rd and Rose, a problem that all week long we've been working there. And you know what a headache that's been, and how many bodies from my office were dedicated there. And we try to help. And our guys work overtime at hours that they're not being compensated for because of one thing. There's something called the rules of professional conduct. And you, Paul, Mr. Chairman, as a lawyer yourself, you know what those rules entail. That you can't abandon a client. That you have to do your job, regardless of how many hours it takes, or regardless if you get paid. You have an ethical obligation to continue to work. And our lawyers do that. And they fulfill that ethical obligation every single day. But unfortunately, it's sort of like, in approving budgets like this, it's sort of like biting your nose off to spite your face, because the people that suffer are not going to be the people in the citizens of LA, because I will not let that happen. I will not let the Treasury of Los Angeles be looted by lawsuits that I know we can win. Just this last year, we tried 18 cases, we've won 16 of them. It's a $56.8 million savings since July. I mean, our lawyers are working hard, they're putting the hours in, but we're at the critical breaking point right now. Our staffing levels, when I took office on July 1st, 2009, I had 83% of my staffing, that's 875 people, were on the general fund. 11%, 113 people in the proprietaries. 6%, 69 were specially funded positions. Today, as I speak to you, 76% general fund. From 875 on the general fund, we're down to 670. 14% on the proprietaries, 124. 10%, especially, or 89 people, special funded grants. So we're going out looking for grants. We're getting grant money to cover people. We're trying to push as much off the general fund as we can. Right now, we're at 883 staff members. Do you know when this office was down below that number? Before Jimmy Hahn. But nothing has changed in terms of risk management. I have right now in my office over 2,500 lawsuits that represent $2 billion in claims. And that doesn't include the cost of punitive damages that we're exposed to, the cost of injunctive relief, or attorney fee awards should we lose. In addition to those 2,000 lawsuits, I have 5,000. Let me repeat that number because it's way, way, way in excess of the industry average. 5,000 open workers' compensation lawsuits that we're defending. If I wanted to bankrupt this city, if these lawyers didn't care and wanted to stop, it would be an overnight event. But they continue to work. If you think you have a budget problem, just think if we get hit on the Ardon case. The reason why Councilman Englander doesn't have his tax ordinance that he has for the new car law is because I have one lawyer that's handling that case with outside counsel and writing his ordinance. And so what's more important, $500,000 savings to some constituents or $1 billion to the city of LA? And we have to make choices every single day like that. And no one realizes that because no one sees it, because in this room, you don't go down to the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th or 9th floors and see these guys working away on these lawsuits. It is a problem that I don't know how you're going to solve it. There's no risk management because the cases keep coming in. I'm involved in every single case that's set for trial. On Good Friday, I spent 3.5 hours on the phone with a guy named Gig Kyriakos, who is a mediator, on a case involving an LAPD officer that broadsided a lady in front of her house. The weekend before that, I was doing another case, again on mediation. Because we don't spend money like we used to. We take these cases very seriously, but the liability in these cases are amazing. And our lawyers do a good job in defending them. So at some point, this council, this committee and the city council has to understand that it's going to become, we're tipping towards losing these cases, because I'm seeing now summary judgment motions not made on cases. Why? Because they don't have the time to make them. Oh, I'll just do it down the road. Or demurs not taken when they should be taken. Or tactical moves being, depots not being done because we don't have the time, we don't have the bodies. And you say, well, how come? Well, because there's only so much, as big a caseload as you can have. In workers' comp, my lawyers have an over 200 file caseload. That's malpractice waiting to happen. Look at this office. I have downstairs on the 5th floor more free lawyers. Let me repeat that. More free lawyers than paid lawyers working in my central criminal branch. How's that? The reserve program. I'm not asking for anything. This last FSR, I put away 1.4, 1.3, whatever that number was, to buy back my furloughs for my employees because I wanted to say thank you. Just give them 6 months of just, hey, here's a bonus for working your tail off. And it disappeared. Got taken. And so what I expected to do and what I can do are two different things. I'm very appreciative for how hard they work. And I'll tell you, this city should be thankful for how hard they work. And as you know, I may not be here next year. But at the end of the day, my feelings for these people will never change. I've watched lawyers work. I've employed lawyers for 20 years. And I haven't seen lawyers work this hard and to be unappreciated. And so when you guys ask me for something and you tell me it's been tied up at my office for 6 months or 5 months or 4 months, you have to understand that there's no bodies. We're staffed below periods years and years ago. You heard from 4 or 5 lawyers in our office today, and they're supervisors. I'd like you to hear from the reserves, the guys who are working for free, and see how many hours they're putting in. And then ask yourself, what are the paid guys doing? Because they're putting in double that. Specifically in this budget, we're short $1 million right now on our outside counsel. I don't know how we're going to make that $1 million up. We just got hit with the CRA conflict, where we're going to have to find outside counsel for the CRA that was unexpected. You know, we've saved money. Let me give you some ideas of where we're at. We did something very novel this year for the first time in the history of Los Angeles. We actually put a collector, a keeper, in a corporation, in a hotel, the Wilshire Hotel. It went bankrupt because they couldn't steal the money anymore. And the bankruptcy court gave us our $2-some-odd million that's going back to the city. Our lawyers did that. Outside counsel, we're operating at a 46% reduction this fiscal year. When I took office, we were spending close to $35 million in outside counsel. Now we're down below 10. All that work came in-house with fewer lawyers. Subrogation, we collected $1.183 this year in $1 million. Complex business litigation, over $200 million saved through negotiated settlements and favorable judgments. Safe Neighborhoods Gang Division, Criminal Division, brings in $429,400. Consumer and Environmental brought in $5.8 million. Workers' compensation, get this, workers' compensation with a caseload of 200 per lawyer, $20 million in case settlements, savings over last year. $20 million we saved. Just give me a piece of it somewhere down the road so we can buy some bodies. You know, at the end of the day, we can't keep these results up because we're losing it. I'm seeing it. Mr. Chairman, I'm seeing we're starting to go over the edge. And I don't know, I don't want to be touched. Again, this budget will get us through, and I'm thankful to have something that'll get us through. But you guys got to understand, we're at the brink. If you took 25% of the cops off the street, what would happen to the city of Los Angeles? You took 25% of the lawyers out of our office, and what do you think is going to happen to this office? We need to realize that you can't defend the city with no army. We add the stickum to what LAPD does. We are the guards at the front of the gate of the Treasury. Take them away and watch what the crooks do. That's all I got to say.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Tutanich. Colleagues, questions for the City Attorney? Mr. Rosendahl?
A bunch. Can report back on them or just feel comfortable about it. First question is, there are now 174 fewer positions in your office budget since July 1, 2012, than July 1, 2009 when you took office. And you obviously references the cutback in staff. What positions have been eliminated over this period, and how has it affected the service your office provides to our city?
Look at, there's priorities in running a law office, especially in defending the city. If the city of Los Angeles gets sued, even if it's a small claim suit. Right. And if I don't answer that small claim suit, we get a default judgment rendered against us.
Right.
And then I have more work because I have to unwind that default judgment. And sometimes it's not as easy. Maybe within the first 6 months you can walk away with it, but after that, you're done. So I have no discretion. So I have to do that first. I have to defend the Treasury first. Then I have to keep the city streets safe. 70%. 70%. I'm closer to 75, I think, Bill. Right? About 75% of what LAPD does every single day comes through my office. Yeah, right. Over 100,000 police reports a year. Listen, the thugs in this city go work 24/7. We only work 4 days a week with furloughs. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're taxed. And I can tell you right now, I'm sure the guys in my office are angry at me because we didn't impose the furloughs 1 day at a time. We imposed them 1 hour a day, 30 days for each day. Yeah. But I couldn't run this office if I had to impose those furloughs 3 days a month. Right. Because the courts are open 5 days. So we have to staff those courts 5 days. We can't staff them 5 days when your lawyers only work 4. And when you're in jury trial, you can't say, "Time out, Judge. I'm taking the day off and I'm leaving." Right. So we've experienced shortbacks or cutbacks in almost every single department. That's why I've got 60 free lawyers. I've been stealing from criminals.
Let me just go through the questions. Okay. It basically backs you up on some of this as well. You have reduced, obviously, outside counsel costs from 25 to 33 million when you came in office, and now 2011 and 12 fiscal year was 8 to 10 million. And you have been doing a reduction. Do you believe further reductions can or should be achieved, and what policy guides the use of outside counsel rather than keeping the work in-house?
Well,
though you dramatically reduced it, I'm just curious.
When you have a conflict, you got to use outside counsel. Right. We don't have a choice. That's an ethical obligation that we have to do. So and we have conflicts all the time. Sometimes we'll have 2 or 3 officers involved in something that we look at it and we'll say, wait a minute, this might be something where we can't represent each and every one of these officers because they're conflicting stories. So we conflict off, and we have to hire lawyers for that. We don't use outside counsel to defend the city unless there's something really different in this case. Right. We've now embarked on something different than we've done before under the Santa Clara decision, where we have begun to use outside counsel on 17-200 cases because we don't have the bodies to fully litigate those cases anymore. Right. We've had to move those bodies to other priorities. Okay.
And I'm pleased that you're taking workman's comp defense in-house, which reduces the cost of outside.
But we are at the point now where this. I'm going to tell you right now,
if this body was to give budget allow you to do this going forward.
If this body was to give me 10 investigators, I'd save you $150 million on workers' comp next year. You give me 10 investigators, I'll save you $150 million. I'm on the record on that. You give me 10 investigators, I'll save you $150 million bucks. I've been telling you this from the beginning. We are so far over the industry average for claims that you need to start doing sub rosas in order to bring those claims down. And if you don't start doing that, you're going to be. It's an open invitation to just keep filing.
Can you report the current status of the proposed municipal code enforcement program? Anybody have something to say about that?
Yes. I mean, ACE is probably the biggest thing that this body can do to enhance its budget, because now when we have penal code violations on issues, all that money goes north to Sacramento. Yeah. We can start enforcing our own municipal code through administrative code enforcement programs, writing tickets, having our own administrative law court here in the city, and making money off of ACE for those people who are violating our municipal code.
Okay, saying that, but when can we expect the redraft of the ordinance so we can do that?
Yeah, I don't have a body. I need to have somebody to draft it, but we're busy right now.
Somebody do that, because when you do that, that obviously will have a direct impact on everything.
Well, I can tell you this, the citizens of LA would love it, and I'll tell you why, because it gives them due process on something they have no due process now on. The other thing is deferred entry of judgment.
Yep.
In criminal cases. We can make money off of that. Listen, we have an opportunity to do a whole lot in this office. The problem is that we're down so far that we can't get it accomplished.
Knowing that, every year people come up and they talk about there are highly published reports of large amounts of uncollected city taxes from private parking operators. What progress have we made to collect these debts, and what strategies do you recommend preventing recurrence in the future?
We have a couple of lawyers that are doing. We have a couple of lawyers that are doing that every single day, going after it. And I just heard from Antoinette that they're going to reduce her by 10 positions. And so I'm looking at this and I'm going, wait a minute, how do we justify this? We want to collect, but we don't want to collect. And so we need to work in tandem with each other and find out when you drop a rock in the pond over here, the rings of water are going to come out over here. We have to understand how things interact. And so if they can't get us cases, or they get it to us too slow, then your money comes in slower. And these are all part of what we need to do. I've been begging for almost 3 years now to combine workers' comp into one department like it used to be a long time ago. But it wasn't sexy. It doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't get people elected. But it sure as hell saves the city a lot of money.
Could you get a report back on that again? Because I'd like to resurrect, obviously, that issue.
And the same thing with finance. I mean, Department of Finance, again, they're sending out letters on my signature. Why not put them under my authority so that we can work on them with a lawyer? These are ideas that we've come up with over the years, but they fall on deaf ears. If you really want to make this system work, then you got to think like a business guy. I have an MBA, not just a JD. And and I think that we can make this city can make it with the money that we have, but we just got to be smart about how we spend it.
Okay, I'm finished. Thanks.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kress.
Thank you, Mr. City Attorney. What types of cases are you unable to handle adequately due to these cuts?
Well, look, we have a case coming up right now, Bruce Lisker, suing the city for $50 million. The other side on the Lisker case has got 7 lawyers. I have 1. I got a volunteer from my reserve program, and I had to move him up there in order to help this guy out. Because he can't hold all the work, because he's got not only this case, but he's got 20 or 30 other cases that he's working on. We are running the risk of opening the door of the Treasury and having it looted. We're diluting our defenses, and we can't do that. Look at it. I know I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I got a case in my office right now where the city paid out $95 million, and there's a department in this city that wants to accept $6 million in exchange to settle that. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, we need to start working as a team in this city, as a team, and be able to save money. If you want to really work hard and do the job, we have to work as a team. We got to start understanding that you can't experience losses like that and then take peanuts on the dollar. Let's not let people take advantage of the city of Los Angeles. Let's stand up and be strong.
And I think, members, those of you who've been on Budget Committee previously have heard me every year object to the cuts to this department, because it's one of the areas where I feel we're very cost ineffective in our cuts. And we did a lot of this at the state level. The example I like to use, which Mr. Krikorian certainly will relate to, is when the state saved around $6 million by eliminating a program called Film California First, which generated $500 million a year on additional filming on state lands. We lost that $500 million instantly when we eliminated that in terms of filming. Probably a net revenue $50 to $100 million a year. So we saved the $6 million in costs, but we lost a lot in revenue. I think that's the same thing that we are already doing to some extent with the city attorney's office, and in danger of making it much worse. The area that I think is the most quantifiable, and I've objected to this every year too, is workers' compensation. I know from my brief time working as a claims adjuster in workers' comp for the state fund that when you reach a point where caseload is too high, you lose a lot more than the cost of reducing down to the right caseload by not being able to do the right discovery, by not being able to do the right investigations. And I don't know if there's some way to look at a pilot program to test out this theory, even though I think it would be almost certain to be true, to provide some additional funding to the department, but to require that it only go towards reducing some of the workers' comp attorneys to a caseload of 125, which is more sort of the best practices standard, and giving them a certain amount of investigators, and then seeing whether the savings compared to the people doing the outrageously high 200 case workload, which I can tell you, anyone will tell you is insanely high, and certainly endangering the city from a liability standpoint. Let's see if we can conduct that kind of a pilot program. I don't know whether it would cost $1 million or $2 million, but I have no doubt we will find that when you look at the money expended and the money saved, that'll be a huge net positive for the city.
You know, we exempted comp from furloughs early on because, you know, nobody wants to work in hell. And that workers' comp division of our office is truly hell. When we took office, the caseload was over 325 cases per lawyer. Nobody wanted to go to comp. You ask anybody in my office, do you want to go transfer to workers' comp? No furloughs. Guess what? They're not breaking down the door to get there because it's hell. And so the only way to do that is you got to cut down the influx. Just last week, we filed we took a case over to the DA's office that we had caught with the one. By the way, our one investigator just passed away from pancreatic cancer. I went to his funeral on Saturday, so now there's nobody there. There's nobody watching the store. We had an employee of the city of Los Angeles who was on comp on videotape water skiing, jumping the wake. And we took it for filing, and we couldn't get a filing out of it from the DA's office because sometimes people don't follow their doctor's orders because we couldn't do enough of an investigation. Here we had an MMA fighter on comp from the city of Los Angeles, and he was fighting an MMA fight. Now, you know, I think even I would file that case. You know, you laugh, but it's the truth. I look at some of the stuff that we take over there. If we had investigators, the claims against the city would drop. Because unless you're truly injured, you're not going to want to be seen climbing on your roof or painting your house or mowing your lawn or doing any of that stuff that disassociates yourself with truly being injured. And so, but we have no way of controlling that. None. And now that we've lost our one investigator and we have no budget to hire another one, and by the way, since July 1st, 2009, I think I'm the only department in the city who has not hired or replaced one employee. Not one person. I'm waiting for the day. I'm going to have a party when I can hire my first employee. You know, I mean it. It's just, be there. That's great. I'm going to bite you all. At the end of the day, Mr. Chairman, we're dangerously close to affecting the constitutional ability of the city attorney's office. And I'm thankful that the mayor has agreed not to lay anybody off because I couldn't take it. And I'm not happy, but I'm grateful that we still can use furloughs to balance our budget.
Well, if I could just ask one more question as a follow-up. Would you like to see that position hired back? Because I can't imagine that a workers' comp division without a single investigator makes any sense.
I mean, that's like asking a kid if you'd like to get in the baseball game free. I mean, yeah, I mean, we'd love to, but we know we can't. There's no way I can do it. I can't do it under the... under what I have before me now, I cannot do it.
I would just ask the CAO if you could include a recommendation to add back that investigator. That I know it's been difficult, and the city attorney has not been rehiring, but I think that's one of the least cost-effective cuts we could have in that department.
For current purposes, that position has not been eliminated by the budget. The man passed away. The budget for the position is still there. The budget has not been reduced. The man passed away. So it's a managed hiring issue.
Right, exactly.
As to whether or not he could be rehired again. So, yeah. All right. Anything else, Mr. Kretz, on that?
No. Thank you.
Mr. Englander.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. I had a lot of questions, but I think you covered most of it, so thank you. Very thorough, Mr. Trutanich. So on page 70, under number 13, on the solid waste resource litigation support, my only question on the realignment of the funding from the general fund to the solid waste resources revenue, since that is a direct fee for a specific purpose, if there are any legal issues with the realignment of those funds, if we're legally allowed to do that. And if you want to report back on that, that's fine.
Well,
City Attorney's Office to report back on the legality.
It's not necessary to give answers to specific
questions
questions like that now. If you don't have it immediately available, we'll be
just look into it.
Asking for reports back that we'll be considering as we consider for budget further. Sure, Mr. Carter.
While you're looking that up, just want to make one statement that since it was brought up earlier about a particular ordinance, we're looking at revenue-producing ordinance, not cost-cutting measures. And so, yes, it's been several months, but looking to work to try to get ordinances that are actually going to produce new jobs, bring businesses here, and help the others expand. And so we're looking at economic development and those types of ordinance that if we can work closer to get those done, because producing more revenue in this city means cutting out less jobs and expanding departments and services or maintaining the ones we've got. And so I'm going to be a stickler on that with all the departments, including the City Attorney's Office, to come up with those motions and ordinances that are going to help local businesses expand to produce that additional tax revenue to the city and sales tax and other sources. I don't know if you were able to locate that.
I have it here, and I know what you're talking about. But again, Councilman, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This requires legal work. In the list of priorities that we have in our office right now, it's probably 5th or 6th down the road. And I know that you guys are responsible to your constituents.
On number 13?
On number 13.
Well, I was just asking if we're able to do that.
I mean, yeah, we'll get to it.
No. I'm sorry. The question, if you can report back then, is just the legality of realigning the funding.
Well, okay, what I'm saying is that we'll get to be able to do the research. It won't be as quickly as you want us to do it, and I understand why you want us to do it. The problem that we're having, and this is where we run into each other, and bumping heads. You come to us and you want something done because you know it's important to your constituents. It's important to like the car ordinance. I understand that, because those are the things that get you guys reelected and make you popular in your districts. But the problem is,
okay, you know what? If I could on that, I'm going to reiterate what I said earlier, because I'm not going to have the back and forth with you here and now and make it a political conversation. But let's stick to the budget issues. As I said earlier, and that looking at ordinances that are going to keep jobs here and grow the economy, to grow the city fund and sales tax dollars, so we can help each other and keep the city back on track, is what I'm for. Going back to item 70, we cannot do this unless we have a legal opinion as to whether we're allowed to realign the funds or not. So we've got to do that within the next couple of weeks in this budget while we approve that budget.
Okay, I want to cooperate with you, but you understand, you just said something that's really important, and every councilman does the same thing. Can I get back in the next couple of weeks? I got the same thing from Councilman Rosendahl on 3rd and Rose in the next couple of weeks. I mean, everybody wants it in the next couple of weeks. I can't do it in the next couple of weeks without bodies.
I'm sorry, Mr. Trutanich, we have to do our budget in this time period.
I understand
and what
that.
Mr. Englander's question relates to your budget.
I know
He's
that.
asking you about how we can deal with your budget, and we have no choice but to do that in this time frame. This is not a constituent matter. It's not a policy matter. It's a matter of how can we make a recommendation that will help you in your budget. That's what he's trying to get.
And it's not a political matter.
I can't, what I'm telling you is I don't have the bodies to get to it in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Well, this will be a report back that we'll want to include from the CAO and the CLA on that issue. And if the city attorney can't make a legal opinion on that, we'll ask the CLA to weigh in on the legality of that as well.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
All right. One of the things I think that you touched upon, Mr. Trutanich, on workers' comp, but I think it broadly applies to much of the work that you do, is liability reduction and the importance of having your office work with the other departments in trying to bring liability down. And I couldn't agree with Mr. Kretz more on workers' comp and what you said on workers' comp. I think it applies in other areas too, how we can do risk management more effectively, with our lawyers, working with the advisors to bring liability
charge back
down.
to departments on liability.
And I wanted to get to you about that point, because that is a proposal that has been discussed, particularly where there's recurring liability that occurs in departments. I'm interested in your views, not now, but on how we can more effectively reduce liability from coming up in the first place in the departments and hold departments more accountable for the liability that they produce on a recurring basis. And,
if I had to pay for something, I'd be a lot more cautious about how I did it.
Well, yeah, and I think there's certainly a relationship between the budget reductions that we're doing in other departments as well, and the resulting liability risks that we face as well that end up coming before your desk.
It's a formula that I'd love to speak with you about, because I think that on a going forward basis for the city, you got to have some accountability at each department for a risk of loss that you create. And so you can budget, for example, I don't want to use the police department as the example, but you could budget X amount of dollars for your liability, based on risk management, based on what you know, based on prior years. But on a going forward basis, if you exceed that budgeted number, then I call that a management problem. And then at that point in time, management should bear the cost of that management problem in their budget.
And this matter is an Exhibit H item in the budget.
And we're going to discuss that further when we come to Exhibit H. I know you need to
I need to take off.
So I'm trying to be respectful of your time. I do want to make sure that when we do our reports back, that Mr. Rosenthal's request for a report on the parking tax revenues is included in our report back collectively, and maybe the City Attorney's Office and the CLA and the CAO can work just to explain what has been done so far and whether it's realistic to expect any more collections in that area, or whether that has pretty much become uncollectible. So that's what we would like to have reported back as well, because it comes up in every discussion, and I think it's an important thing that we have a full exposition of this. So thank you very much, Mr. Trutanich, and Mr. Kretz.
Just one very brief additional question. How many attorneys are being used in the lawsuit against Etz Chaim Synagogue?
One.
Could you use that person for something more productive if we ended a completely non-productive 17-year legal battle?
I'm getting ready to draft Mr. Krikorian to handle a few lawsuits.
Thank you.
I'm not interested in being involved in the litigation against the synagogue, though. I can tell you that right now. All right. Thank you very much.
I don't choose what lawsuits we're involved in. They just happen. They're like relatives. They just occur.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Trutanich. Thank you for your time. Okay. Good to see you both. Thank you. Thanks, Mitch. Thank you very much, Mr. City Attorney. That brings us next to the presentation by the Office of Finance and Treasurer. Thank you for your patience. Come on up to the center. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Okay.
Now, you missed my introductory comments at the beginning, so what we're doing with each department is sort of assuming that everyone here knows about the functions of the department and what you do, so it's not really necessary to give a kind of overview presentation, but feel free to provide any introduction you would like, but it's not necessary to do the general stuff. You can get right into talking about the specific budget recommendations of the CAO and the mayor, and what your particular requests and suggestions would be. That'd be fine.
Okay, thank you. What I wanted to first touch on, I know the CAO's office, they did a presentation about field positions that are being eliminated, and it showed that there were two field positions being eliminated in the Office of Finance. We actually have 10 field positions that are being eliminated. In addition to that, 7 vacant positions, so it's a total of 17 positions. I did submit a letter to the committee, and what I'm asking is, because the Office of Finance is responsible for the collection of over $2.5 billion in revenue annually, as well as actively managing an $8 billion investment portfolio and managing cash and debt programs totaling $50 billion annually, that we do be provided an opportunity to add positions back should funds become available, in order to ensure that we are able to meet our charter responsibilities, that is investing as well as collecting and generating revenue. So we're asking if funds become available that those positions be added back. There are 2 field clerk typist positions that we will work with the CAO's office on providing alternatives so that those positions are not eliminated. We have there are 2 vacant accounting clerk positions that we would offer up unless there is a way to have the field positions added back through other means. So we're hoping that that there are opportunities so that we can get some of our positions back, mainly because they do service the public, service taxpayers. They're very critical positions. They're involved with billings, supporting our audit staff, supporting our administrative staff, as well as our tax compliance officers and the collections unit. So we do ask for consideration.
Okay. Thank you. Questions for finance?
Yeah, I'll tell you what.
Mr. Rosendahl.
My first question, which we get a lot of, and in part I was suggesting something similar to the city attorney, is there remains a lot of uncollected debt among various city departments, namely fire and Department of Transportation. But here's the punch. Some of this money can never be collected. Okay? Can you explain that issue and why that's the case? So instead of hearing these large numbers all the time, we can't collect it certain amounts, and give us the answer why.
Right. Actually, a lot of the uncollected debt that's on the books, and of course the fire department as well as transportation are working through that, writing off those accounts, are out of statute. They're no longer in statute for collections. As well as the fire department, some of their accounts receivable that's uncollectible represents adjustments that should have been made because the amount that was billed was
and that's legally uncollectible, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Legally.
Right. So can't we just get them off the books so that
yes,
people just don't grab it and think that's something we can actually do?
Yes, and both fire and transportation have made a concerted effort to reduce the uncollectible portion of their debt. They have submitted over $344 million in write-offs, and they still have a couple of $100 million that they still need to get off the books because that debt really is not collectible. Part of it's not legal, and most of it's very aged, old, and out of statute.
Okay, and if you, in a report back or something, could put that clarity out there so we just don't get that same hammer when they don't realize that it is uncollectible. Legally, we can't collect it, and that's the reality as you reduce it from some ledger of some debt.
We can do that.
Okay, and then how much revenue do you anticipate next fiscal year from this Lean Authority program?
Okay, the Lean Authority program has been a very successful program for the Office of Finance. The program was introduced last year. We collected $1.1 million. This year, we're tracking close to $4 million, and we anticipate another $4 million next year.
What efficiencies or savings will be achieved by the field office closures? Now, I know I have one in Westchester that is 2 days a week, but you're leaving the one in West LA open, which is fine. They'll just have to go to West LA from the Westchester area. Though they're not going to like that if it's for efficiencies and it saves revenue. I'd like to understand how your consolidation does that.
Well, with the Westchester, San Pedro, and Watts office, what we found is that in terms of the number of taxpayer visits, that they're very low, and the amount of revenue that's collected there. So the efficiencies that we anticipate really would be through our web-based program. We do have alternatives for taxpayers to be able to actually conduct business online 24/7 without any interaction with the Office of Finance. And so we're hoping that many of those folks will use our web-based programs. But if they decide not to do that, we do have other public counter offices that will be able to assist them.
So the people need to know that you do have an online program, right?
Yes.
And it's completed, the status of it is clear, and one can access it.
Yes, it is clear. We've actually implemented a number of online operations programs this year. All of our renewals you can e-file electronically. You can pay all your bills for Office of Finance online. When we issue the annual business tax renewal notification to taxpayers, we encourage them to e-file as opposed to coming into our public counter office or submitting a hard copy renewal. So we try to do a lot of outreach to get that message across. But I do want to state that not every taxpayer will use our web-based program.
Yeah.
They're not mandated to do that, but we do encourage them to do so.
Sure, and with that encouragement and convenience, I'd like a report back that clearly says that, because you just verbalized, but not everybody's watching this and will remember it, even if they are watching it. But that gives people a better sense of the efficiency and how you're developing other ways in which people can pay bills. Okay.
We can do that.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendahl. Mr. Kretz?
Hello? There we go. I know in the past year's budget, 2 tax compliance officer 2s were added with funding to assist tax compliance efforts to increase business tax receipts by $800,000. Has the Office of Finance achieved $800 in business tax receipts, or wound up ahead of that, below it?
We have achieved the $800,000 in additional business tax revenue. That's in the base for this year and for next year.
Very good. And I know your budget reallocates 5 positions to revenue management division, obviously because we've heard over and over again about our difficulties with collections, and hopefully this will help. Do you have a rough estimate of how much more additional money we think we'll collect with those 5 additional positions?
Actually, they're not new positions. What we are doing, and we've gotten approval from the Personnel Commission, is to actually reallocate the position from a finance collection investigator to tax compliance officer. So their titles have changed. They're still doing the same work. There are not new positions. And that particular unit, the citywide collections unit, generates annually about $30 million, and we are within 71% of our goal to date.
So we're not reallocating 5 people to that
No.
function. We're largely just changing the titles.
Correct.
Any way we can reallocate some people to that function?
Well, I think what's important right now is that we have actually reallocated positions over the past 10 years that I've been the general manager of the Office of Finance. particularly with the efficiencies that we have achieved. As a matter of fact, for the citywide collections unit and revenue management, we've allocated a number of positions from other areas within the Office of Finance to take positions from some of the remaining areas now would actually result in loss of revenue on the other end. So I think we've sort of balanced out there. What would be important is that if the Office of Finance is exempt from the managed hiring process, I know that I touched a nerve for some folks, and I do apologize because it wasn't intended for to be towards any individual. It's just really the process. As a revenue generating department, we need to be able to fill our positions quickly and get them out there collecting, generating the revenue that's due to the city. So I think that that's where we would see a big benefit for us.
If I could add, it's important to point out that that currently these workers are being furloughed in this fiscal year. The budget does not include furloughs for these workers, and in fact, for the entire department, with the elimination of furloughs, they'll have over 50,000 additional hours of productivity that they could engage in work. So unlike this fiscal year, starting July 1st, there will be no furloughs of EAA employees in this department, allowing them to increase their productivity overall without adding additional positions.
Well, that would certainly be a positive, because again, if we want to improve our revenue collection, it seems counterproductive not to adequately staff the department. Are we able to assist them in the managed hiring arena as part of this budget process? Can we give that direction?
We place priority on positions that are revenue generating, and so as we do this year, we will do so next year as well.
Okay.
One thing I do want to state is that I indicated in the letter that the process takes about 8 months. It's not just the managed hiring part of it. It's from the time that the position is vacant until the position is filled. So not all of the 8 months are attributed to the managed hiring process. But it is a part of the overall process, and if we could cut some of that time out by having the Office of Finance positions exempt from the process, that would greatly help us.
Well, I for one would certainly encourage that. So any way that we could as part of this budget process, I'd be supportive of that.
Thank you. Mr. Englander.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just a couple of things. First, I think you've done a fantastic job at bringing everything online, doing a great job at increasing the web-based activity and making it much more user-friendly and customer service friendly.
Thank you.
And so thank you for that. On a couple things here, well, first, and I'm just going to piggyback on the some of the verbiage and terminology and ask, maybe we can look for, instead of a report back on Office of Finance in terms of managed hiring, a holistic approach citywide on, Mr. CEO, you mentioned that we have a priority process for revenue positions, producing positions. If there's a way to, instead of having just a priority on that, I'm not sure what the definition of priority is, but an expedited process for revenue producing citywide. If it's a fully revenue producing position, an expedited process, if we can report back. So we don't have to do that on every single department for the next 2 weeks. Just take one crack at it and saying, how can we, instead of having a priority put on those positions, make it an expedited process if it's truly revenue producing and have to meet that objective. But if you can come back with some suggestions on that.
There is an item in Exhibit H that directs us to do that. To find other ways to.
It's all in Exhibit H.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And then on that, for Ms. Cristobal, on the business tax website, I had heard from numerous CPA firms that on the day that the actual business taxes were due, the site was down throughout the day. And I also noticed that and I'm not sure if these are related, that on the LA tax on page 228, number 17, there's a $250,000 expenditure for power builder support, for enhancements. Is that the same thing, or is this something different?
I'll let my systems guy speak.
And what happens if somebody can't pay their business taxes on the day they're due because they log in the system is frozen.
We've actually granted them.
We did
the
something on
yes,
that.
we
Okay.
did not charge them any interest or penalties. We allowed them.
Because we were overburdened, I heard.
Right, but they needed to show proof that they did try to file them. So based on what they provided, if it showed that they actually tried to file their tax by the due date, then we actually would allow them to actually go forward and file without interest or penalties.
Oh, we did?
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely.
good, because that was the instruction I gave to some of the CPAs that called that day.
Oh.
And I said, just take a screenshot of showing that the Office of
Yes.
Finance,
Right.
that the system's down, because that's what it said.
Yes.
And perhaps if you submit that, if you run any problems, call me. And I never heard from them again. So you were on top of it. I appreciate that.
Carl Sampson, Director of System Office of Finance. Basically, we're tackling the problem in two ways. This year we have a budget item in MICLA funding to upgrade our database servers. What occurred was basically we had too many transactions trying to access our database server at one time.
So more people are filing online.
Yeah, and so it's really expanded over the years, and now also the hardware itself has reached the age of replacement as well. So on one avenue, we'll be looking at upgrading that equipment and getting that in place, and the other is looking at also the routines that we have and making that a little bit more optimal.
I don't know if there's a way or an opportunity to look at bringing additional hardware in for that day. That doesn't sound like it needs to be annually. It sounds like it's that one particular day where everybody files on the
Exactly.
last day.
That's what
so we don't
happens.
have to support that hardware all year long for that one day of filing if there's somewhere to look at.
Yeah, and this hardware and also the change in the code as well. More than half of the taxpayers that file on the last day or try to file on the last day don't owe any liability. And so if they would have just filed a few days before, and so we're looking at providing code special for them that don't have any liability that's under 100,000. Right. Takes a lot less CPU cycles to also address that as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then my only other question, I had two others. So on page 228, line 18, it says the two tax compliance officers are being regularized to increase business tax receipts. And I'm trying to figure out how this is an increase. If they were already resolution authorities, how are they going to increase business taxes by $800,000? We've already had them there. We're just regularizing them.
Right. Basically, what they're doing is they're moving them from reso authority to regular authority. The $800,000 of additional revenue was generated this fiscal year, and we are including that $800,000 in the base for 12-13.
Okay, so it's not an increase, just a maintain.
It's just a
Got
reallocation
it.
from yeah.
And then on the on the other issues, and these were from your memos, on the MA2s that were in managed hiring for 3 months, but I think we just addressed that. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Englander. Just a couple of things. Can you describe briefly the impact of the merger with the Treasurer's Office, how that has gone, if there's any ongoing issues that you have to deal with in the coming year relating to that, particularly as it might impact on the budget?
Actually, I think it's gone fairly smoothly. We actually just migrated from Wachovia to Wells Fargo. That became effective February of this year. But just with the team that I have, both Treasury and Finance, we're working very cohesively. We've been able to save, certainly the city money. I think it's about $1 million in savings annually, and we think things have gone very well.
Great. There's been a recurring theme here about our collection efforts, and you've addressed some of that today, and you've addressed how you can become more effective with more capacity. I think it would be appropriate to have a report back about progress that's been made in collections over the last year or so, how you are addressing the recommendations that have been proposed from a variety of sources, the core report, the auditor, the controller, and so forth. And also related to that, related to Mr. Kretz's question regarding the position reductions that you're talking about in your departmental letter. To the extent, this is probably very difficult to ask, but to the extent that you can quantify for the positions that you would like to be restored, and you've requested that if funds were to become available, you're requesting that consideration be given to restoration of frontline positions. to avoid potential loss or delay in revenue generation and collection. I think in order for us realistically to do that, we would have to have a clear sense of what revenues would likely be generated from that particular position restoration in this fiscal year in order for us to make that assessment. And so if you can drill down a little bit more in your report back about each position and what its likely revenue generation potential is that can be budgeted for this fiscal year, that would certainly be a stronger justification, I think, for being able to restore those positions.
Okay.
I think that covers my question. Is there anything else for Ms. Christoval? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, colleagues, we're doing pretty well here.
Yes.
Congratulations to everyone. We're keeping on.
Don't jinx it.
We're keeping on
Don't
pretty
jinx it.
good, pretty good pace here. All right, so that brings us next to Lacers.
While Lacers is coming forward, if I could ask the CLA for clarification on the report back on the recommendation from the City Attorney's Office, including the recommendation from and the letter back and the report back from Mr. Koretz to identify possible funding solutions to workers' comp investigators. I'd like them to include looking at the City Attorney's whole budget, including what is suggested in furloughs perhaps, and using those savings, if we should, reinvest those into additional inspectors to then bring in more revenue to the city. So if they could include that in the memo back. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, it still is afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. We, Lacers did not submit a letter regarding its budget because of the committee's obvious interest in best practices. Earlier this week, we did email a copy of Lacers' best practices. The best practices include strategic planning going back to 2004 and continuing on. Out of respect for your time, we'd be glad to answer any questions regarding the best practices or any of the other issues regarding retirement in the city.
Thank you. Mr. Rosendahl?
Yes.
I
Good
thought you might.
afternoon. Good to see you.
Thank you.
How many Lacer members are there, active and retired?
We have about 26,000 active members and about 17,000 retirees and beneficiaries.
When we talk about the airport and the harbor departments, which we also manage, what is the payment breakdown of each of them?
Do you have that?
The airports and harbors pays the same contribution rate as the general fund.
Very good. You know, I must applaud everybody that upped their contribution from 2 to 4% in the program as part of what we were moving forward. How did that work, and how do we feel about it, and where do we go from here, if anywhere, on it?
Well, we administer the pension plan,
Right.
and so we were able to make some quick changes to receive those contributions. It's, more of a budgetary issue for the city as to the relief that provided the city budget. There were some significant savings for the employees contributing, but really from an administrative standpoint, it was seamless for us to be able to receive those contributions.
Great. Do you have a comment on that?
That's correct. As I said in my initial remarks, it is that contribution that was a major part in reducing the structural deficit.
Mm-hmm. And what is the average health subsidy per retiree in Lacers?
The average health subsidy for non-Medicare is $833 a month, and for Medicare, $382 a month.
That's great. In your view, how important is it to establish a new pension reform plan?
Well, again, that is an issue for the city family. We administer the benefits that you and the mayor, through the appropriate processes, decide upon. The 8-point plan that was put forward by the mayor certainly addresses the major cost points that I think anybody would be looking at if they were looking to change pension benefits.
You know, some people think if we combined all pension funds in some way or another, that it would impact efficiencies and potential savings. I don't know if I agree or not. I'd just like your thought on that.
We do everything we can at Lacers to achieve maximum savings in the way that we conduct our business. An example of that is a recent asset allocation that our board went through that's going to be saving the city $8.5 million next year and $10 million annually thereafter, and be saving our fund. We also work with the other pension systems in the city very closely. For example, with investment managers, we have contracts with them that aggregate the amounts that we have invested so we achieve the maximum possible savings on management fees.
Great. So we're getting the folks together on that level so you don't have to have separate this and that anymore in terms of staffing and that through.
Absolutely, to the extent that we can. We collaborate very closely, especially with the fire and police pension system.
Could you give us a report back and show how that works and how the efficiencies happen? I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I didn't ask you to please introduce yourself for the record, Tom.
I'm Tom Maudas, General Manager of Lacers. I have with me Lita Payne, Assistant General Manager, Lee C., Assistant General Manager, and Sarah Griggs, our Chief Investment Officer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Gretz.
Yeah, my only question was asked and I think kind of partially answered on the combination of Lacers and fire and police pension functions. Are there still any areas where those functions duplicate and where we might find efficiencies by combining administrative staff?
I think that the plans are very different. And so even if you combined the systems physically, you would not save much in staffing. You might save a little bit in administrative expense. But there wouldn't be significant savings, I believe, because the plans are different and have to be administered separately by specialists in each of those areas. They're very specific plan provisions that can get very convoluted, and I don't think that you could have one staff member that would be proficient enough in each of the plans to do an effective job of delivering the benefits.
Well, I would ask anyway that the CAO take a little bit of a look at this and report back. It may not be significant savings in the grand scheme of things, but we're tight enough financially that if we found any kind of savings without harming the system, it would certainly be worth considering.
Sure, and just to note, it would take a charter change to consolidate the system, so it would require a vote of the people.
Right. I'm not talking about necessarily consolidating whole systems. I'm talking about whether we could try to consolidate some of the administrative functions.
I believe that there might be some challenges in attempting to do that. Under the California Constitution, you can't take any powers away from an existing pension board. There was a recommendation in the audit in 2007 to consolidate some of the investment functions, and I know that they ran into that at that time, but something we can certainly help look at.
Well, we'll prepare a report maybe outside of the budget if on addressing all the issues and some of the issues that was raised.
Yeah, I guess that would probably be fine, because I doubt even if we decided to attempt any of this that it would be quick enough to be dealt with as savings in this year's budget.
Thank you.
I just want to finish before it goes back to him. The Chief Investment Officer, when you said that, could you give us, and I'm very proud of how we've managed our funds, your sensibilities going forward over the next year in that role that you play?
Primarily, I've been working on a tremendous amount of fund governance, getting the policies in place to make sure that we safeguard our assets. We put in a risk budget. We've done a major asset allocation, of which we'll be changing and doing about, I think it's 13 manager searches over the next 12 to 18 months to basically augment that plan. Also, I noticed that Commissioner Englander has always brought up, like, how many managers do we have in California,
Right.
how many in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
We're constantly always looking at that for the plan. We have $470 million roughly direct commitments into Los Angeles. We have $5.3 billion, or 50% of our fund, that's in California. 3 of our consultants have offices in Los Angeles. the other one in Northern California. So this is something that we look at. And that's not even going down to the individual investment or company level. So it's something that's very close to our heart.
And how much money are we talking about?
Currently, we're at $10.8 billion.
$10.8 billion.
$10.8 billion, and we're running a positive so far this year. We should knock on wood.
That's why I was very positive with you, because knock on wood, it's very good. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Englander.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming here. I've just been looking at some of the documents, and I'm not sure if Lacers and is truly maximizing returns by allocating to the fund managers who garner the highest and best returns on retirement funds. And so I've got some questions in regards to that, particularly if you were allocating more dollars to these entities who also happen to be emerging managers. And it's really pertaining to the emergency managers, which are the women, minority-owned type of entities, and then conceivably the city's general fund contribution to Lacers could then be reduced. And so my questions pertain to that. And have you exceeded your benchmark index in every class over the past 12 months?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, okay. And so, in which classes and with what asset managers have you exceeded those with? And maybe this could be just a report back, so I don't put you on the spot to do that.
That would be nice. We can definitely report back on that. But if we wanted to discuss emerging managers, I think Lacers has probably put the fairest policy I've ever seen in place. And basically our board just adopted it, whereby every manager search, if a manager has, I believe the floor is $50 million in assets under management in that segment, so definitely under the $2 billion mark. If they have 1 year of performance and a 5-year performance record, all of our manager searches are going to be open for them to be able to compete and to be able to take it into consideration for selection.
And that's my concern, and that's what I want to hear back on, is the $50 million benchmark, is that if they didn't
You mean the $50 million assets under management?
Right. If they're not at that threshold, then they still have to work under
probably a fund-to-fund.
Right. And so how are we looking at those and increasing those allocations for the minority managers if they're performing better? And so is that too high of a threshold? And
well, if a $10.8 billion fund of $50 million is...
But a lot of them can't still reach that and take some years.
In that case, they would have to be under a fund-to-funds type of structure.
And so if you could report back on that policy, but if there's an opportunity to lower that threshold or look at expanding the policy to get more emerging managers on board if they're performing better, it to me would make some sense, but I'd like to see your perspective on that and to come back with that.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Mr. Cardenas actually submitted a number of questions in the same general area, which I'm going to take the liberty to read, but I'll also give them to you in writing. They'll just be for reports back. They don't need to be answered now. Will there be impacts to existing Lacers emerging managers as a result of the asset reallocation plan being proposed over the next 18 months? If you're increasing allocations in the international asset class, are you aware of and currently using emerging managers in the international asset class? And what are your goals as they relate to fund allocation resources that you award to MeeBee and emerging managers? And what is your allocation goal to those groups today? Please break it down by asset class as a comparison of the total resources allocated to all managers. That was submitted by Mr. Cardenas. Yeah.
And I can tell you that our board adopted an aspirational goal to double the funding to emerging managers in the next year. So that answers part of your question.
Very good. And there's a number of other questions here. I think we'll just submit them for the record and ask that all those questions be included in your report back as well. Anything further, members? All right, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your being here. Thank you. And actually, not so fast, Mr. Englander. That brings us to fire and police pension. And then we will be ready to wrap it up. So, if we can have the Fire and Police Pension Fund representatives come forward.
Thank you.
That's weird. It's not printed on the printed agenda. Fire, it says LAC. Fire. Oh, it's on.
Good afternoon. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Councilmember. My name is Bill Raggio. I'm an Assistant General Manager at Fire and Police Pensions, and I have with me today is Joe Salazar, our other Assistant General Manager. So we did submit a letter to the committee. We pointed out some best practices that we have in our process. We have a multi-year strategic plan, included within that is a governance best practice initiative, and we conduct annual offsite educational board meetings, which was recommended in the October 2007 management audit. We're implementing a business continuity plan, again recommended in the management audit, and we've implemented an internal audit section recently within the last couple of years, which was also part of the management audit. So I could go into further details, or I'll answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Members? Mr. Rosendahl.
Yes, good afternoon, almost evening. It's getting close there. Just gonna turn that off. Okay. Was there to be potential savings from establishing the new Tier 6 pension plan that was approved by the voters last year? And if there is, what kind of savings are we talking about? And because inherent in that, so if there is, then why is there a $22 million increase in city contribution to this fund this year? That's the Tier 6.
There are savings. I don't know if we have those calculated or if the CAO would have them calculated. To the extent that the payroll is programmed into Tier 6, it's only about $2.7 million. To the extent it's a percentage of payroll basis, there is savings there. Somewhere of about 4% as a percentage of payroll, I believe, for when applied to a $2.7 million payroll.
Right, so it's just a few people that are in that process. How's the new tier had any negative impact on the city's ability to recruit and retrain and retain new police officers? Do we know?
That's really a question for the chief and for the personnel department.
Correct.
Okay, it'd be nice to
we'll
tell
report
them
back on
that,
that.
because we
Yes.
just want to know if it's had any impact. What steps are we taking to help manage the health and fitness of pension plan members, both active and retired, so that obviously their long-term health care costs can be reduced? For example, employees' wellness programs, those kinds of things. Are we engaged in any of that? Because we all do live longer and costs continue to rise. Unfortunately, we don't have a national plan in place. I wish we could take the burden off of the local scene and make it one of the priorities of the federal government is health care for all of its citizens. That would be a tremendous relief to a whole lot of people. But frankly, are there steps that we're taking to encourage wellness-type strategies among people?
We have quarterly newsletters that go out to active and retired members, and we include articles in there on that subject. In addition, we do work with the relief associations, the police and fire relief associations, and they actually administer the health plans for the members. So we work with them to try to get that type of information out there, and they're actively providing that type of educational material to the members, since they're also very interested in
So
keeping
it's
the costs
coordinated
down.
with the policy, with the personnel department too?
No, they're the LA Fire and Police Relief Associations who administer the health plans for the sworn members. So they are not an entity of the city, they're outside the city process.
Yeah. Is it possible, or would it be helpful to reach out to the health personnel people that do that and see if it adds anything to it?
Yeah, as I said, we do work with them in order
Yeah.
to get that type of information and education out there to them in our newsletters, and as well as in the information that they provide directly to their members.
Okay, and then the last question I have, assuming a large number of GSD police officers, if in fact it's integrated into the LAPD, become sworn members of the LAPD. They then transfer over to the police and fire pensions. How would that change the amount needed for the TRAN to make the required city contribution?
I'll go ahead and answer that. We had an extensive discussion on that this morning, and the actual number of sworn police officers in LAPD is remaining the same. And so instead of hiring 37 officers from outside of the city, those positions are being made available for GSD officers. Those GSD officers that do not become LAPD officers will continue being members of LACERS as they are today. So there will be no impact on our pension contribution to fire and police pensions.
But it's certainly nice to hear that 37 could enter into the LAPD that way, which would obviously save us a lot of money in the training of somebody else. 23 million.
No, 2.3 million of savings as a result of reducing, eliminating the July class by allowing those positions to fill in.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Mr. Englander.
Thank you. And just a quick question on the budget book compared to the blue book. On the budget book on page 347 and then in the blue book, volume 2, page 675, on 347 it says the city contributions to the general fund is $505,082,619, and then on 675 it says it's 506,86,262. Are those different numbers? Are they supposed to be? Am I reading it wrong, or is that a typo?
I'm sorry. What were the two pages?
Okay,
again,
I'm sorry.
sir?
Yeah. So if you go to the budget book on page 347, it's on the top right under receipts, city contributions to the general fund.
Okay.
Yes. What was the other number that you're comparing?
And then if you go to page 675 under Fire and Police Pension Fund in volume 2, it's 506,86,262.
The total required contribution is the general fund contribution plus the excess benefit payment. If you look at page 347 and you add the 505,082,619 with the excess benefit amount of $1,003,643, you net that number out, you get the 506,086,262.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
I'm just kidding. Okay. Okay. And then with that, just double checking. There was nobody to call at 3 a.m. when I discovered. No. And then on the, just for clarification on this, it shows that our city contribution currently is 39.94%. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's correct.
And in 2002, the rate was 11%?
Yes, that's correct, and that's partly because the system was over 100% funded, so the city was taking a credit, which reduced the normal cost.
And I know we've gone and changed the smoothing, and so I'm not sure what the rate of return after the smoothing is. Is that the 7.75%, or the actual rate of return on the actual value of assets based on the 2011 plan? Is that showing it was 3.78%?
Right, that is, the 3.78% is the smooth rate of return.
Okay, and so the current rate of return now after the smoothing is the 7.75. Is that correct?
No, I'm sorry, what? That is, right. The assumed rate of return is 7.75, and after it's smooth, it's the 3.78, I believe is the number.
Okay, and it was prior to the and the return prior to that was at 8%. Is that correct? So is that's I'm just trying to get
the assumed rate of return was 8%. Was 8%. Until I believe 2010 is when we changed it.
And what's it anticipated right now if we're, and I'm not sure if you know or not, but we were at 11-12, we were at 30%, 30.07 I think. And then this year we're at nearly 40%. Do we know what we're looking at moving forward? Is there projected?
Yes, at the request of the CAO's office, we had our actuary prepare a 6-year illustration of what the future cost may be. And we refer to it as an illustration just so everybody's clear. We're not trying to forecast or project what's going to happen into the future. Currently, we're at 39.9%. I know in the 4-year outlook the CAO prepared, they use a 0% rate of return for the current year and then 7.75% into the future years. And we're right at about 1.7% for the current year. So that's probably a good assumption to use at this point. Out to fiscal year 16-17, the rate will be 59% if that forecast holds. Wow. I'm sorry, that illustration.
Those are worst case scenarios.
So I believe the CAO in their report showed a $750 million contribution to the system in fiscal year 16-17, I believe it was. That's right.
And I'm assuming that then that's tied into your anticipated structural deficits.
That is correct.
Which is where the bulk of it's going to be coming from.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I know the assumed rate of return was lowered in 2010, was it, from 8 to 7.75? So if you look retrospectively, look back 25 years, what is the actual rate of return on investments been for the fund on an annualized basis? And if you don't have that at your fingertips, you don't need to give that right now. But I'm always interested to see, when we make assumptions like that looking forward, and I know it's based on a variety of factors and national standards and so on, but it's also worth comparing to what the historical performance has been as well.
I would ask that we get back to you on that.
That's fine.
Last year we had over 22% rate of return. June 2010 we had almost a 14% rate of return. The 2 years that really hurt us obviously were 2009, 2008 when we had a -20 and almost a -5.
That's much too short of a time frame to really be useful in looking at an assumption about rate of return on a pension fund. I would look at more like a 20 or 25-year time frame.
Yeah, we do have that information. I'm sorry, I just don't have it available. But as you may know, CalPERS and CalSTRS both reduced their rate of returns, their assumed rate, to 7.5 this calendar year, earlier this year.
Well, so while we're at it, while we're making that comparison, it would be useful if you could report back on what not only the historical rate of return has been over that last 25 years for your fund, but also how does that compare to the historical rates of return for some of the other funds that you mentioned, for CalPERS and PERS and CalSTRS and the others?
Sure, we have that information.
That'd be great. All right. Anything else, members? All right. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And members, as much as surprised as I am to say it, it's 5 minutes after 5, and our work for today is almost concluded. It would have been concluded, but for the fact that Mr. Englander wants to say something further.
I would just want to rename this budget process the budget and efficiency process under our new chair.
Yes, so, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we'll see how long it holds up. We're going to have a more robust discussion probably starting on Monday. Right. So we will be continuing this meeting then until Monday, when we will commence with further departments. And I want to thank you all, members. Thanks for your time efficiency. Mr. Santana and everyone else, thank you very much for all of your assistance today. We'll look forward. Have a good weekend, and we'll be back again on Monday.